Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Became Eraserhead's Rooftop Informant. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Be realistic with his dreams. That was the advice that All Might had given him. Maybe he was right. It was unrealistic that he could become a hero. He was a useless Deku, even if he saved Bakugo. That didn't change that he'd almost died earlier that day. Besides, he couldn't even protect himself from his bullies and he wasn't strong at all. It was for the best and he was lucky All Might hadn't been mad that he had to share his secret with some random quirkless nobody. He looked over to see his notebook and saw the charred title, Hero Analysis for the Future. He almost wanted to laugh. There was no way he'd ever had a chance. His mother knew it, All Might knew it, his teachers knew it, even Bakugo knew it after knowing him his whole life. Bakugo. He was just now realizing that he'd subconsciously stopped using the nickname Kaken in his head, but since when? It hadn't changed this morning, so it had to be at school. But when? Take a swan dive off the roof of the building. He may have been joking, but friends don't tell each other to kill themselves. He knew that and Bakugo knew that. They hadn't been friends for a decade, but for whatever reason, this felt more final. Izuku decided to think about the day. It had been rough, but if he didn't take time to think now, it'd be swirling in his mind for months and he still needed to apply for a local high school instead of a hero school like UA. Maybe he could still apply to general studies at UA. It was one of the only 20 high schools in Japan that accepted quirkless students because the principal, Nedzu, quirk high spec. It gave the Chimera increased intelligence and is one of the reasons he owned such a successful school, the others being his fairness and take no prisoners attitude, especially towards abuse and bullying. As much as Izuku would love to go to UA, it wasn't realistic. He wouldn't make it in any way. Not to mention it was really expensive and he wouldn't put that pressure on his mum, not after everything she'd already done for him. He enjoyed being useful today when Bakugo was attacked today though. Maybe if he couldn't be a hero he could offer them his analysis. He'd always wanted to be an underground hero like Eraserhead, so he could start there. He'd go on different chat rooms he knew underground heroes used frequently for information about villains or criminals they had to take down and send them anonymous messages with quirk analysis. Izuku was too aware of his mumbling habit and knew that his mum was a light sleeper. If she heard him then she'd wake and that would only worry her. He couldn't let her find out. Not his mum or Bakugo or his teachers, they'd all try to stop him for any reason they could find. It wouldn't be as bad if the underground heroes saw his face, he just wouldn't tell them his last name. That's how Izuku found himself climbing out of his window with a bag filled with his laptop, notebooks, pencils, hero care kits for his top 5 favorite underground heroes in the area and a flask for hot chocolate. He climbed up the fire escape. Sitting on the roof and looking out over the city, he could see why people enjoyed it up here. It was peaceful, almost ironic how he was about to start a new dream and a new life where Bakugo had hoped his life would end. He didn't want to think about that now. He had to find any villain's quirk that he could analyze. He wanted to be useful and this was how he could do that, so Izuku opened his laptop and began mumbling his notes, occasionally pausing to take a sip of hot chocolate. Eraserhead was surprised when the chat room he used with other underground heroes sent him a notification from an account he didn't recognize called Hot Chocolate Analysis. He read through the information, which was surprisingly clear. Everything was labeled and put into categories of facts, opinions and theories, as well as possible fighting styles and methods for safe capture of the criminal he'd been chasing for almost a month. He decided to check out the sender's location to make sure this wasn't a trap. He didn't know much about technology, but after a quick phone call to Nedzu, he had the address that the message was sent from. It looked like a normal apartment building, but he could never be too sure. He decided to message Ms. Joke since she likes to patrol the area and told her to call for backup if he didn't text again in 15 minutes. She sent a smiley face and thumbs up as a reply, and Eraserhead began towards the address. He was only a few buildings over when he heard the quiet mumbling of a very detailed analysis and the sound of someone typing something. He focused on where the sound was coming from to see a small figure hunched over a notebook, illuminated by the light of a computer screen. Suddenly the figure stilled and looked directly at him. It was impressive that they'd noticed a hero who specialized in stealth, but Aizawa still didn't know if it was related to some sort of sense-enhancing quirk. If it was an enhancement quirk, then maybe it could be related to the analysis. He'd just have to play it right and find out more about the kid, and it was definitely a kid, from the small size of them to the childish voice of the mumbling. They couldn't be older than their first year in high school, going to second in just under 10 months. He warily headed over and balanced on the railing of the building, watching as the kid reached into a yellow backpack that looked surprisingly like his sleeping bag and pull out a small bottle and a cup. He poured something into the cup and put the bottle beside it on the floor, moving back to his notebook and continuing to write. The hero looked at the items the kid put down, eye drops and a mug of hot chocolate. Whoever this kid was, the hero was suspicious. No one knew his weakness was his eyes, or no one should. His phone buzzed again in his pocket and he picked up. "Hey joke, all good?" It was a code in the underground. All good could be either a question or an answer, so they could tell if there was a threat that meant they couldn't talk or use phones. The kid glanced up like he was waiting for the hero to talk, but for whatever reason, Eraser couldn't think of anything to say. Was this a quirk? The thought hit him and he activated Erasure, but the kid just looked excited and began writing and mumbling in double speed, so not an analysis quirk then. Suddenly the kid paused and shrunk back on himself. "Sorry," he stuttered, "I just theorized that you had mild telekinesis because of your scarf, but because your hair stands up then dash." He cut himself off with another apology. "What are you doing out here, kid? Shouldn't you be in bed?" Eraser asked, carefully reaching for his scarf but trying not to alert the kid. "I don't really sleep anymore. I didn't want to wake my mum, so I decided to come up here." The kid didn't seem to be lying, so he could work with that. He looked the kid over, noticing now he seemed reluctant to move his shoulder and had a few burn marks that were only half covered by his hoodie. He'd mentioned not wanting to wake his mother, which set alarms off for Eraser. He needed to make sure this kid was safe. "I don't really sleep much either." The kid gave a small smile, but at least it didn't look forced. "I overheard you mumbling. Are you the one who's been sending Underground Heroes analysis all night?" Suddenly the kid flinched and looked down at his notebook. He was quiet for a moment but then spoke. "I'm sorry, I just figured I can't be a hero, but maybe I could still help." "I'll stop." The kid stuttered over his words and seemed afraid to talk too much. Eraser looked at the kid for a moment before deciding he needed protecting. He wasn't sure what he was protecting him from, but he would protect this kid. "That's not it. As long as you're out of danger, then it's okay. I just needed to make sure the information we got was safe." Eraser hopped of the railing, trying his best to appear non-threatening while still making sure to stay alert. The kid looked hesitant but nodded. "I guess that makes sense, because it's an anonymous account. Anything I send could have been from anyone. I doubt criminals would give real information unless it benefits them, so it could have been a trap." He paused his mumbling and looked up. "I'm sorry for wasting your time looking for me. I guess I should have thought it through a little more." He was still curled in on himself and seemed terrified to look at the hero. "It's all good, kid. How'd you find out about half the underground, though?" Aizawa was curious, and the kid seemed to be telling the truth with everything he was saying. Not to mention he needed to fix whatever errors were made that let underground heroes be found. The kid paused for a moment. There's a Discord for secret fans. We just share fan art of merch and stuff. I looked for heroes without flashy quirks. It took a while, but then I found the Discord. There's only 56 of us, but we all say our favorite hero is All Might if anyone asks." The kid looked up with a small smile, but it was hardly noticeable. "Fans? For underground heroes?" Eraserhead was surprised. He had no idea any underground heroes had fans or supporters. They went unseen, even by other heroes, and they were barely recognizable to police, known the select few, but that was only because of past cases. The kid nodded. "Yeah, all the merch is subtle too. This hoodie is your merch." Eraser looked at the kid and he was right. It was a black hoodie with a gray lining and small gold embroidery around the bottom in the shape of an eraser. It was subtle enough that you wouldn't notice unless you're looking for it. It was smart but slightly concerning. He could focus on that later though, for now. "So what can you tell me about my quirk?" The hero pulled his goggles up, and when the kid pulled a notebook out of his bag and began mumbling about everything to do with his quirk and fight style, he sat down and listened. It was difficult, but he managed to keep up thanks to dealing with the other extroverts in his life, and Eraser would never admit it, but seeing the way the kids seemed to light up while talking about quirks was definitely worth the temporary concern he had about the source of anonymous information given to the underground. A lot of things were uncertain in the world. Shota was half sure that the sadistic rat of a boss still needed some of the answers, so he had little hope of gathering the ones he wanted to know. Despite all that, though, one thing was certain: the rooftop kid was smart. He'd used logic and figured out a lot about the way he fought and how erasure worked. A sentence kept spinning in his head, though: a secondary telekinesis quirk. He'd never really thought about it before, never considered why his hair floats or how exactly the scarf worked. He just assumed it did. That was enough at first, but whoever the hot chocolate analyst is, he'd changed how Shota was thinking about his quirk. Maybe Rooftop had some type of quirk that let him know what a quirk was, then he started doing analysis after that? He decided he'd need help with this, not from the omniscient rat god, but help nonetheless. Maybe he could ask Joke, Tensei, and Night Eye. They wouldn't mind helping out, right? Only one way to find out. Needs a nap. I need help with the hot chocolate analysis case. Laughing out loud. I thought that was closed when you found out who it is? Needs a nap. It was solved. There's still more before it'll be finished with. Lie detective, what do you need to know? Needs a nap. Hot chocolate analysis is a kid, no older than first year in high school. Lie detective, you think he's safe at home? Needs a nap. I don't know, why else would a kid be on a rooftop that late at night? Gotta go fast. If the kid needs help, then we'll help him. Right? Laughing out loud. Definitely. Izuku collapsed into bed about a minute before his alarm went off. As the phone buzzed itself off the desk with his alarm, he pulled the covers over his head and let out a groan, only to be interrupted by a notification from the site he used to send heroes his analysis. Jumping up, he read the screen to see a message from Ingenium asking if he had any advice for how to take down a villain who also has a speed quirk. He typed out a quick response about needing more information before throwing on his uniform and running out of the door. Mum was still asleep, so it was better to leave early and not wake her up. Of course, on the way to school he noticed how much louder everyone was. Bakugo hadn't attacked him yet, but he still wondered if he was just waiting for a teacher so he'd get praise for practicing his quirk. It wasn't right, but neither was most of the things at Aldera, the way they treated students with weaker quirks and discriminated against anyone who was different. Izuku got through the day, ignoring the burns that itched under his clothes and the cuts that pulled. At least he made it halfway through the day without having to talk to anyone. His throat felt like it was burning. Maybe he should have gone to the clinic after getting attacked. One thing he was thankful for was the symbol of peace not taking him to a hospital. He wouldn't have been able to leave and they would have charged him more than he was able to give. Last time he went to a doctor was when he was diagnosed. It had quickly gone up in price to more money than Mum had in her bank account and savings combined. He didn't go to the doctors after that. For a while he just hid pain or injuries, but then he'd found an underground clinic that only helped people who doctors turned away or overcharged. It wasn't exactly legal, but they didn't advertise it, and since Izuku started going there, he learned all the laws around quirk discrimination. The building was owned by Mika, another quirkless person who'd first showed him the clinic, but since quirkless people couldn't be charged with anything less than murder, there wasn't an issue. The doctors there were volunteers who had been trained in first aid and gotten certified from an anonymous site online. Izuku found the site and said that as long as someone quirkless was in charge there wouldn't be any problems. The clinic was actually how he first found out about Eraserhead. The hero had been shot and knocked out, then dumped in the alley out back. Izuku had been dropping of some spare clothes when he found the hero unconscious and dragged him inside. After treating the wounds, he'd found the hero license in a pocket. Izuku then got help to move him to near a real hospital, then called the police anonymously. A detective called Tsuka something, he was only 10 at the time, he couldn't remember the name, seemed very worried about the hero but also happy that Izuku had found him. After that, he researched more about Eraserhead. He found out everything he could about the hero, then underground heroics. He discovered a whole world that operated under the radar, sticking to the shadows and working on the less glamorous parts of heroics. The parts people were afraid to talk about, the things that most were afraid to see and affected for years after they had seen them. Underground heroes saved people like him from people who wanted him and people like him dead. At first it made him angry that there had to be a whole other part of heroics that saved people unworthy of the spotlight, but then he thought about it. It wasn't that he was unworthy, it was that civilians needed an illusion of safety in the chaotic world of unlimited power that came in the form of quirks. It wasn't that he didn't deserve it, it was that people like him needed protecting and the anonymity provided that safety. Another ping in his pocket called for his attention. It was a reply from Ingenium with the information about the quirk. Gotta go fast. I've been assigned to the crawler case. He's a vigilante with a speed-based quirk. I've attached a file with anything else we have on him, but it's not a lot. Thanks for taking this up and offering help. He read over the information and made a quick summary before searching to see what else he could find about the vigilante. Hot chocolate analysis. His quirk looks like it can project an attractive or repulsive force from his hands and feet. The user can slide across surfaces by lightly repelling themselves away from any surface. The sliding gives the user great speed. As far as I can tell, he can get up to speeds of a fast bus but usually stays to average speeds of a bus. The quirk can also be used to go backwards, shift from side to side as well as rotate. As much as his quirk can make him move far faster than a bike, but doing so is dangerous, as he has no brakes, and his power does not prevent him from taking damage from his quirk. To stop him, I'd recommend finding an area he isn't familiar with and cornering him so he can't escape or use his quirk. If you can get him into a narrow enough space, Eraserhead should be able to erase his quirk from a distance so you can apprehend him, while Eraser also keeps him anonymous identity as safe as possible. I hope this helps. Please let me know if you have any other questions. Also, I'm not a professional analyst, so I'd highly recommend that you ask someone more qualified to check over this information. Reading over the message once more, then a few extra times to make sure it was perfect, Izuku hit send and began walking home to finally get some sleep. He could do his homework later on the rooftop. Hopefully he could talk to more heroes again tonight. Chapter 3. Izuku finds a friend. Climbing onto the roof wasn't easy. The ladder was broken and it always pulled on his burns when Izuku lifted his arms to get onto the roof. He usually took the stairs, but the roof access was closed a few nights a week when the security was at the building. "What are you doing?" A voice behind him spoke up. Its owner sounded young, so he turned around to see a girl sticking to the wall behind him. Trying to get to the roof, but His hand slipped, but he managed to regain his grip. The door was locked. She looked at him for another second. "I can lift you up with my quirk if you want." Karo, Izuku was surprised. Someone wanted to help him? She didn't know he's quirkless. "I saw your shoes. My little sister's friend has the same ones," she said. "My name's Tsuyu Azui. Call me Tsu." Some sort of mind-reading quirk? But that wouldn't explain how she could stick to the wall or help him get up to the roof. "What kind of quirk?" "It's called frog, you just mumble a lot." Izuku blushed red out of embarrassment, then realized that Azui had said she didn't mind that he was quirkless. Izuku didn't know how to react to that. Most people would find out and either beat him up or give him that look of pity and mock concern. But Azui, wait, she said to call her Tsu, but Tsu didn't give him those looks. Maybe she could be a new friend. He should probably reply though. "I'm okay, I need to get stronger. I'm Izuku Midoriya." Izuku smiled. "Okay Midoriya, I'm still going to stay here in case the ladder breaks or anything." Tsu returned the smile as they both climbed to the roof. Then once feet landed on concrete and Izuku caught his breath, Tsu gave him a look he'd only seen from his mother when she caught him doing something that she didn't understand, like analysis or just staring into space. "Why are you on the roof?" "Karo," she asked after a moment. That made sense. At least she didn't think he was weird. "I was going to give hot chocolate to pros," Izuku said, resting his bag at his feet. "But don't pro heroes work at night, do they?" She tilted her head and put a finger on her chin. Izuku tried not to go into a mumble spree, failing as usual but still managing to keep it shorter than usual. "There's a few types of heroes. Spotlight heroes work in the day. There's commercial heroes like the laundry hero, Wash, who works in a few areas of heroics but focuses on public opinion. Heroes like Present Mike or Night Eye are dawn to dusk heroes. They can work either underground or more of a spotlight role like with Present Mix radio show. Then there's the underground heroes. They work primarily at night and don't get any media representation, so they can still do undercover missions and other things. There's also specialist heroes for rescue missions, arrests and battle, evacuation, strategists and medical experts. Sue looked at him for a moment. You're really smart, Midoriya. Are you applying to a hero school so you can be, what did you call it? A strategist hero? She asked. Izuku didn't know what to think. Was she mocking him? She knew he was quirkless, so why would she ask that? No, I wanted to be an underground hero, but... He let his voice fade as the words set in. Maybe she just didn't realize, but that small voice in the back of his mind still whispered doubts. Sue gave him a look, but it wasn't like the hate or pity that he was used to. Then I hope you're doing something related to heroics. I definitely want to work with you when I go pro. Izuku was shocked. What about support or analysis? He could work with that. And he'd still help heroes, but that was almost what he was doing now. Just legally, and with more chance of being exposed as quirkless. Maybe. I'm not sure yet. He settled on, however non-committal it sounded. Then, before she had a chance to respond, two figures moved towards the rooftop Izuku and Sue were standing on. You need to go or you'll get into trouble. Izuku whispered urgently. What about you? Sue shot back, not making any move to leave. I'm quirkless. I can't get arrested for anything less than premeditated murder. I'll be okay, but you're breaking curfew so you can get arrested. He said, looking slightly more worried the closer the pair got. But she tried to protest but saw the look in Izuku's eyes and nodded before jumping off the rooftop and into an open window nearby. It was one of the nicer houses on the other side of the park, separated by a small stream and a few trees that expanded into the forest he used to play in but now used as a hiding place for after school. The figures landed on the roof. Hey, you must be the hot chocolate analyst. I'm Miss Joke. I'm also Eraser's wife. No, you're not, Joke. Eraserhead said monotonously beside the smile hero. She only laughed in response. The figures landed on the roof. Hey, you must be the hot chocolate analyst. I'm Miss Joke. I'm also Eraser's wife. No, you're not, Joke. Eraserhead said monotonously beside the smile hero. She only laughed in response. Ignore her. We actually came to ask you some questions and maybe get your opinion on a case we're working. A case? Izuku asked. His voice went up a few octaves with the surprise. Ms. Joke grinned at him. I saw your analysis and I've been struggling on this case for a while, so I was hoping you'd be able to help us out some. After a moment, Izuku took a breath and nodded hesitantly. I'll see what I can do, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. It didn't work. He ended up stuttering over a few of the words. The heroes just took it in stride though. Miss Joke handed Izuku a file. He read over it and began mumbling over details. It only took a few minutes for him to look up and reach for his notebook. A woman was dead, her daughter was severely injured, and the father was missing. After flicking through for a moment, looking over the photos of the crime scene, he looked up. The father killed her. He was a quirk supremacist and she was diagnosed quirkless. She managed to escape while the mother took the attack. He looked back to the papers. I think I know where you could find him too. The heroes looked at each other for a moment before looking back to the kid. How do you know it was the father? Joke asked hesitantly. There was a flyer in the bin and poster on the fridge. Izuku said like it made any sense. When the two heroes just looked confused, he pointed at two of the pictures. See here? There was a flyer in the bin. You can't really see it, but there's a corner that has a red Q in a circle. That's a quirkless logo. They hand out the flyers to parents after kids get diagnosed quirkless, sort of like the flyers they give to people whose families aren't likely to survive an injury. He said solemnly. Then on the fridge, the sticker is a quirk supremacy group. They don't believe quirkless people deserve to exist because of the differences in evolution, so they kill them or injure them enough that they'll die of medical neglect. Ms. Joke looked somewhere between shocked and confused and angry. Eraserhead just looked blank before he spoke. Where can we find him? The warehouse next to the park. They mostly have combative quirks or aesthetically appealing mutations, so be careful. Izuku said, suddenly sounding a lot more sure of himself. Eraser nodded, pulling out his phone and typing something out. "Thanks, kiddo, we'll make sure they can't hurt anyone else," Miss Joke said before jumping away, leaving Eraser with the kid. "Kid, are you okay?" the hero asked hesitantly. He looked up, painting a fake smile onto his features. "I'm fine." Eraser shook his head. "No, you're not." "I'm sorry, kid. It wasn't fair to ask you to analyze that case dash," he began, but was interrupted. "No. It's not that. I'm okay. I promise. I'm glad I got to help," Izuku said, an edge of anxiety lacing his voice, but it was overthrown by an unbreakable desire to save people. Eraser sighed. "Kid, it's okay to say if these things are getting to you. We're not going to abandon you for taking care of yourself and talking about how you feel. It's okay." He tried again. The kid listened this time but didn't seem to believe him. There was a moment of silence that stretched between them, not comfortable but not awkward either. It was just there. "I just want to help people," he whispered after a while. The hero knelt down, looking the kid in his eyes. "I know, but you've got to take care of yourself too." He looked like he was on the verge of tears, but they didn't fall. "That girl," the kid began to say, "just make sure she knows it's not her fault and that she deserves to be happy." The smile that was painted on a few moments ago suddenly became more real. A shadow passed over the kid's face for a second, but it was the most genuine Eraser had seen him in their short time knowing each other. He needed to save this kid from whatever he was fighting. "Okay." He pushed himself up and stretched his legs out. "Hey kid. You deserve to be happy." The kid's eyes widened like he'd never been told that simple phrase before. He was about to speak, but then Eraser's comm rang out with an alert for backup, so the hero had to make his leave all too soon, leaving Izuku to think about the 5 words he never knew he needed to hear before. Izuku went to bed early that night. His mind was still buzzing from what Eraser had said. The hero hadn't done anything more than say his own words back to him, but it was more than anyone else. For the first time ever, someone had heard him. A voice in the back of his head whispered that it was only because he didn't know about his quirk status. But another part of him stupidly hoped that maybe the hero wouldn't hate him once he inevitably found out. But that's when he heard a knock at his window, pulling him back away from his thoughts. A brown-haired figure was watching a certain rooftop, but RHA just wasn't left alone. First the frog girl who arrived with him, and then Eraserhead and Ms. Joke showed up and the frog girl left. Then the pros left, and so did RHA shortly after. So he did what any reasonable vigilante looking to welcome a new informant onto the scene would and knocked on his bedroom window. There was a startled yelp from inside and a shuffling before a vivid green eye looked out from behind the glass. Then the window opened and a kid put a hand over his mouth and climbed outside, pointing to the roof and shimmying up the ladder. Of course he followed, slipping on the last step and finding his wrist in the green kid's grip. "Heh, I didn't realize it was that slippery," he said as he was pulled up onto the roof. "Anyway, thought I'd introduce myself. I'm the crawler. I heard Ingenium wanted info about me." "You are RHA, right?" Koichi introduced himself. "RHA?" the kid asked. It was at that moment he realized he might have F'd up. Did RHA have a younger brother? This kid was small. The one who sends analysis to heroes? I know it was a building in this area, but vigilante gear isn't always the best. I honestly just saw green and assumed. His bashful expression hopefully did enough not to out RHA as an informant to his brother. "No, that's me," he said hesitantly, instantly calming his concerns. "But why RHA?" He just hadn't picked a name. Ingenium got closer to actually catching me than he has in a while. I was curious, so I asked. He said a new informant gave him some good info. I asked who. He said he didn't want to say in case I got any ideas about making friends, so I got a friend to find out some stuff, and they said to look for a green dude called RHA. He hesitated slightly. Trying not to be too overbearing was difficult. They said it stood for Rooftop Chocolate Analysis, he said with a grin. He really had to be careful with his words. Some young women had punched him outside of the university because he'd asked if he could walk her home. She must have misunderstood him. He just wanted to help out a little. You should probably pick out a name though. The pros are calling you Hot Chocolate or Rooftop. The kid squeaked. A name? He nodded, noticing the anxious demeanor for once and leaning against the railing. It moved under his weight, so he just sat on the floor instead. Yeah, just an alias. It means we can know who you are without knowing your identity. That runs the risk of you getting arrested. Oh, I can't do that, the kid said. Of course not. We need more informants on the scene, and from what I've heard, you got some crazy awesome analysis. He nudged the kid's shoulder. Luckily, you've got your first vigilante friend to help out. Oh, so I need a name? Or something that isn't my name so pros don't know my real name? The kid asked hesitantly. Yep. Crawler confirmed. The kid thought for a minute, a hand tracing an outline of something on his shoulder. What about Deku? What? Do you mean Dekairu? He asked. The kid just shook his head. It should be something I'm used to if it's a name. Most people call me Deku, so... His voice was so small and dim, and the kid had a lot of scars. How did Koichi not notice before now? Well, your name should be something for you. You can pick anything and just try saying it to yourself a few times every day. That's what I did to get used to all of mine. And I've changed my name a lot, he said, trying not to focus on the starburst patterns covering the kid's arms. He'd probably have to tell Ingenium or Eraser something about that. Well, if I'm helping heroes with information, then maybe something related to that, the kid suggested shyly. Awesome idea. So like giving clues for cases and stuff? Koichi tried to encourage the kid. He just nodded hesitantly. Okay, well, whatever you choose, just make sure it's something that you can be proud to say. The kid nodded again, and silence filled the space around them for a moment. Then the kid spoke up. You wear a lot of All Might merch, right? The question threw Koichi off, but he answered anyway. Yeah, I don't get much of the fancy tech that the pros do, so I wear this. He gestured to the hoodie he was currently wearing, to make me more effective as a hero even without the fancy support gear or suit. The kid nodded and looked thoughtful for a moment before looking up again. I have a lot of merch you could have. I don't need it anymore, and it's better that it actually gets used so you can have it. He couldn't help but laugh, then feel bad that his laughter made the kid coil back. Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. That just isn't what I was expecting, he explained. The kid let some of the tension out of his shoulders. I'd appreciate it. Most people in the underground only do things for a price, so I'll pay you back. The kid looked confused for a second. It's okay, you don't have to pay me back, he said. Crawler was about to argue but saw that it probably wouldn't work out if he did. Maybe he could just try to explain? That should work, right? Okay, he began, trying to figure out how to word it. It's okay to do things, but in the underground there's a lot of people who would take advantage. Especially with you being so young, it's important to make sure you keep yourself safe. I get if you want to do things to be nice, but make sure people don't take advantage of you, even if you ask for something small in return. The kid hesitated. Do you think you could help me pick a name, please? If it's not too much trouble, he asked nervously, twisting his hands over each other in his lap. Sure thing, kid. How about I meet you here tomorrow night and we can brainstorm? I'll have to split pretty quick if we see a hero, though. He responded easily and found himself swelling with pride that the new informant was getting some confidence. Crawler silently vowed to protect Greenie with his life. Sue didn't know what to make of the boy she'd met last night. He was interesting, had a lot to say, but he was also lacking social skills. He was mostly harmless, just a bit strange. And what was that about the underground heroes? She sat in work, sketching out another potential hero costume design for when she made it into high school while she leaned over the counter. One of the regulars wandered in, holding a notebook and thinking over something as though it was the solution to world peace. What you working on, Koichi? She asked as he almost walked into the counter. She swore he was going to cut himself in half if he carried on walking into things like that. He looked up and grinned. Tsu, I found out a new teammate joined the campaign. He seems like a good enough player even though he's new, but he forgot about a name for his character. Koichi was a part of a huge RPG group based on old pre-Quirk hero comics. I would offer to help, but I know nothing about RPG games. Maybe just find a word to describe him and look up synonyms. She offered, moving a plate from the stack and handing it to Koichi before putting a blueberry muffin on it and making a mug of coffee for the sleep-deprived customer. Honestly, the game really shouldn't be late at night, but that was when everyone was off work and occasionally high school, but from what she gathered, the RPG group was mostly college students. Tsu, You're a genius, he cried, jumping up and swallowing the hot coffee back in one long gulp before grabbing the muffin and running out of the cafe, leaving Tsu to work the rest of her shift. Izuku didn't expect to see Crawler on the way home after school. The man was out of costume but still using an all-might hoodie and sat on a park bench, scribbling in a notebook. He didn't realize how long he'd been staring until an explosion sounded out in small pops and an angry voice that he'd been avoiding caught up to him. "Du." Bakugo looked almost possessed. Usually, Izuku managed to escape at the end of the day and used that to only deal with set-off Bakugo instead of Bakugo with murderous intent. That was usually the times when he'd have to go to the clinic instead of treating his injuries himself like he usually did. Izuku stopped calling Bakugo Kaken in his head a long time ago. Out loud, he still used it as a mild and mostly ineffective taunt. Just a reminder that the great Katsuki Bakugo used to consider himself best friends with a freak and a quirkless Deku. And now he was running. Izuku quickly climbed a fire escape, for people following closely behind. Strange. It was usually 3. He made a dive and fell into a roll on the floor of an alley, laying back and acting unconscious with exaggerated breaths so no one assumed him dead until 3 sets of footsteps retreated. He stayed perfectly still. "Come on, don't die on me. I'm still looking for a name for you." The voice desperately pleaded. Right. Mouth to mouth. Izuku shot up. "Not dead, not unconscious." He said, "Crawler? What are you doing here?" he asked, taking in the man's plain appearance. He just chuckled, "Gave me a scare there." "Glad you're okay, Greenie," the vigilante replied, carefully avoiding the question. "So people really do call you Deku? I thought you meant as a friendly nickname or something that just got carried on from childhood." He shrugged. "It kinda was. It just started after I was diagnosed. He faltered. "It's just a nickname. Bakugo used to know me as a kid, the rest picked it up from him." The silence stretched between them till the vigilante coughed. He tried to break the silence. "I've got a couple of names." He pulled out a notebook, opening it to a page and showing scrawny handwriting underneath a line that read, "Note to self, don't forget to send that email for the coursework." Crawler, just read over the name ideas. There's Greenie, for obvious reasons. I also thought about Anomaly, but that sounds a bit too much like a hero name, so you can use that if you ever decide to go pro or vigilante like yours truly. Other than that, I didn't really get too far with it. Izuku pointed to a series of words scribbled underneath the 2 names. "What's this bit?" he asked cautiously. "I started brainstorming," the man said, just as a timer went off on his phone and his eyes widened. "Sorry kid, I'm gonna have to split or I'll be late. I can meet you tonight on that rooftop and we can finish thinking of a name, yeah?" With a nod of confirmation from Izuku, Crawler was sprinting onto a rooftop and away, already pulling a laptop out of his rucksack. Maybe something to do with the coursework note on his notebook? Izuku dusted himself off, picking up his own bag before making his way home. Crawler climbed up the fire escape and collapsed on the roof, closing his eyes and heaving a sigh of relief mixed with exhaustion. The moon lit up the sky, rising earlier than it had in the past summer months, and the autumn air chilled his bones to a comfortable temperature so he could get away with a hoodie and a few extra layers underneath but also hug a hot drink if he so pleased. The only thing was, with it getting darker earlier, he'd started spending more time as a vigilante and less on coursework, leading to a mad dash across the city just half an hour before every deadline. Koichi had never submitted work late and planned to keep that, but maybe turning in work early would be nice too. But time is an illusion and hyper-focus usually said that. He would pick anything else to do instead of coursework until the last possible minute. It was fine. Probably. Maybe? A shadow cast over him and he opened an eye to see Greenie stood over him looking mildly concerned but also confused mixed with exasperated. "I can't tell if you're hurt or exhausted, so are you okay?" he asked, offering a hand that Koichi ignored in favor of closing his eyes again. "Brain hurts. Very exhausted," he summarized, hearing Greenie sit beside him. "I know they say stay in school and stuff, but I really wish staying in school was easier. Also cheaper. Student debt is gonna be chasing me forever. That's why I get practice by running across the city to meet deadlines." His voice still had its usually peppiness, just mixed with the typical college kid exhaustion. A hum of agreement came from Greenie and then something cold tapped against his hand. Here, Green said, and Koichi opened his eyes to see an unbranded cost I don't know about copyright but definitely Monster energy drink being offered to him. He sat up, craving the caffeine that would save his mind from its eternal work-induced slumber. Thank you. I swear, caffeine has got to be some sort of heavenly ambrosia. He grinned behind the can as he chugged the whole thing down. Greenie nodded, sipping from a flask that smelled like coffee. So, I have a couple ideas for your name. I was thinking you can either pick one or if you get inspiration and think of one yourself then that's cool too. He wasn't really going to mention that most of his name ideas were pretty basic. They weren't meant to be good, just to inspire the kid to come up with a name. The identity of a person he could be when his real one wasn't serving him well. That's what a name was in the underground, a sign of respect. People heard a name and the inevitable ghost stories that would be born from the minds of an overactive imagination in a world that slept around a person, and with the name they could understand and feel either fear or relief or some combination of the two. He didn't want to come up with the kid's name. It was too important. But he would help him out with a bit of inspiration. If the kid couldn't think of anything, then he had a list that would work too, but it was a last resort. A kid entering the underground had every right to choose who they got to be. He looked over the list, circling a few and jotting notes next to them in the margins. The kid asked his opinion too at a few points and he offered input, usually in the form of encouragement or saying that the name was already taken by someone. At the end, about 6 options were written in Green's notebook. They looked over the list, trying to find one that would suit the kid. Crawler crossed out Deku and Dekairu. The kid could reclaim it, but for now, he didn't seem ready to understand that he wasn't useless. Taking the name would be the kid's way of labeling himself with a red flag before anyone else got the chance. Healing took time, so maybe the kid could use Dekairu eventually and have it be reclaimed. Maybe with time, but not yet. With the list narrowed down to 2 names, the 2 teens stared at the paper in hopes that it would stop staring back and give them an answer. After a long time, Izuku pulled out a pen and wrote them both on a new page in his notebook. I like this one. What do you think? The kid hummed, pointing to one of the names. Koichi hummed, I like it, it suits you. Do you want to stick with it or do you want more time to figure it out? He smiled wide. I think I'm gonna stay with it. Feels sorta like home? Is that weird? No, the vigilante hummed, but after a second he continued, well, a little, but that's why we all do this. We're all just looking to feel better or something. Home is a pretty cool way to describe it actually. The kid smiled before suddenly spinning around on the spot and looking behind them before whispering, Crawler, run. He spared a glance back to see Eraserhead looking increasingly exhausted and a little bit confused, standing behind them. And so he ran. The kid wasn't a vigilante, he'd said so himself, and Crawler had seen heroes working with him before. The kid would be okay. He, on the other hand, could be arrested for vigilantism. And besides, he had a couple friends and allies to talk to about the incident he saw earlier with the kid. Eraserhead weakly threw out his scarf just after Crawler ran, not really trying to catch him before sighing and pinching the bridge of his nose with a forefinger and thumb. Izuku really didn't know how to react to the hero. He was nice, but he always seemed so stressed, so he did the only thing his mind offered and asked, Do you want a hot chocolate? The hero blinked and Izuku mildly started overthinking. I have coffee too, or tea if you'd prefer that. And I can get other drinks. I think I still have an energy drink in here that I never got to give to Crawler. He quickly began looking in his bag before he heard a half-huff, half-chuckle sound coming from the hero and he looked up. Kid, Eraserhead sighed. Care to explain why you're talking with a vigilante? He just sounded exhausted. Izuku poured a coffee. Underground heroics meant a broken sleep schedule, so the caffeine would probably be appreciated. Oh, he was helping me pick out a name. He said it's important so I can keep myself safe. He hesitated before pulling out 2 sugar packets and pouring them into the cup before handing it to the hero. Izuku watched as the hero looked up from the coffee, curious. Have you decided on a name? I was thinking Eavesdrop or Eves for short. He said, sipping on his own drink and watching for a reaction. Eraser nodded, a somewhat approving look residing in and behind his face. Good to know. he said simply. Then, as much as I'd rather a kid not be involved in heroics without any training, welcome to the underground eavesdrop. Eves grinned, suddenly feeling more confident than he had in a long time. It was difficult to explain what the feeling was. Confident was a part of it but not its entirety. This feeling was like how Izuku always imagined home would feel like. The feeling that faded from his earliest memories with each passing day. "Thank you," he whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. Eraser hadn't once treated him like glass or looked at him with unwarranted pity. The hero saw him. And Izuku didn't know if thank you would ever be enough to articulate that, but it was all he had. So when Eraserhead looked at him, a question forming on the end of his tongue, he didn't feel scared. Izuku just waited for the hero to ask. After about half a minute later, he sighed and the question never came. Maybe the hero would ask another time, but then he chugged the coffee and then looked down at the cup like it had simultaneously offended him and rescued a kitten. "Good coffee," Eraserhead said. "You did well on the rescue case. We found the girl and she's with a family known for being accepting of quirks most people avoid. I also started an investigation on the treatment of quirkless children in schools and in the foster system too." His eyes widened before he had time to stop them and shock painted his face. Izuku didn't really get a chance to properly react before Eraserhead turned to leave. "I should probably go chase a vigilante so I can say I did my job." Izuku let a small laugh out and waved goodbye to the hero before he ran in the same direction as the vigilante. After Eraser had left, Izuku made a note to buy an extra pack of the good coffee before settling into his newest analysis. Eraserhead didn't know what to think of Eves. The new informant seemed okay, a little skittish and nervous, but after he spoke to Crawler he seemed a little more confident. That wasn't to say his concerns were wiped clean, just settled a little for the time being. Eves working on the case was a sight to behold, the way he consumed and handled information, processing and organizing every detail. It took him all of 3 minutes to solve what had taken a group over a week. That showed precision and skill that took years to master. Which is why Eraser was going to make sure everyone believed he had a powerful analysis quirk. It was safer in the underground to have that upper hand, and goddammit, he'd keep this kid safe. If that meant saving every other kid he could to prove he was trustworthy, so be it. He hadn't lied about the investigation, he just hadn't seen the results of his efforts yet. As much as he knew these things took time, he still wanted the process to hurry up so he could help a whole lot of people that no one knew needed saving. He'd save Eves too in time. Eraser just wished that time would come sooner than it was inevitably going to. Inko Midoriya handled a lot, and in her opinion, she handled it well. She was a single parent working 2 jobs with no help financially or otherwise from her ex-husband. She wasn't there as much as she liked for her son, but she always made sure someone was. The woman who lived across the hall had become something of a grandmother for Izuku, and there were plenty of neighbors who were willing to let him spend time with them if she couldn't make it home in time for dinner. More recently, she'd cook dinner in the morning and ask that he either reheat it or puts it in the freezer and goes to one of the neighbors. They'd always check in on him, but he was older, so an hour or so between him finishing school and her getting home from work wasn't too bad anymore. The neighbors are all vaguely aware of his lack of a father, and a select few know of his quirk status. Those ones are chosen by Izuku whenever he feels ready to tell anyone. Very few neighbors know the whole story, mostly because they didn't need to know, and she didn't want it to change the way they thought of her or her son. She could never stop them from speculating though. Regardless of anything, she loved her son, and while she couldn't be there as much as she wanted, she was there as much as she could be. Helping with homework, or asking him to explain it. Her boy was smarter than she was, listening to him talk about his favorite heroes, or even a new hobby like code or that online advanced maths course he'd just finished a week ago. She made sure to take care with everything she did for her son. Inko handled a lot, but she still couldn't handle it all. Izuku came home with injuries and gave the excuse of just playing around, or being too clumsy, so she spoke to Mitsuki Bakugo and asked her to mention it to Katsuki to see if he knew anything and to see if he could keep an eye on any bullies. Both Izuku and Katsuki insisted he was just clumsy. Inko had done everything she could think of. She'd called the school, threatened lawyers, begged the nurse to treat her baby when he came to her, called the police, tried to hire a lawyer. Everyone dismissed her out of hand as soon as they heard Quirkless. Then if she stayed quiet, they'd find out eventually and the already hefty fee would double. No matter what, she knew that Aldra was the only middle school that would accept a quirkless student because it didn't have a quirk control assessment. It was hard for Izuku to pass an assessment for something that he didn't have, so without his safety protocols, he couldn't get into anywhere else. She'd looked at homeschooling too, but she wouldn't be able to afford it with her jobs and Izuku wouldn't really have anywhere else to socialize. That led her to online courses, but they started at high school level, and while Izuku was smart, he was failing all his classes due to unfair marking. Something else that she'd fought against and failed at. So while she knew it wasn't enough, she did what she could. She stocked up the medicine cupboard and showed Izuku how to tend to his injuries while always checking them again as soon as she was home. She'd found a clinic that didn't refuse to treat quirkless patients. She'd moved to a neighborhood that didn't have too many discriminatory policies on cafes or libraries and found as many courses that didn't ask for age online, all the ones that had certificates and some sort of a resulting qualification. She knew Izuku liked visiting a local cat cafe. It was called Olive Branch if she recalled correctly. The owner was a lovely person with a heart of gold. They had a quirk labeled villainous by society, so while their struggles were different and equally as horrendous, they could understand Izuku's struggles in a way she wasn't able to. Inko knew her privileges in that way, and used them in the best way she could. She taught anyone who would listen at work and left leaflets with bits of information and petitions to eradicate the discrimination that was so deep-set into a society that was, realistically, just learning to function with its newfound relationship with the magical abilities. So while Inko did everything she could, it still wasn't enough when she came home to her baby already passed out half asleep over the bathtub with bandages in hand ready to be applied to a nasty scrape covering his knees and shins. It wasn't enough when she heard him sneaking food in the dead of night and then him climbing onto the fire escape. It wasn't enough when she found him sleeping less and less with growing bags under his eyes but a slowly growing, small and real smile on his face each morning with breakfast. It definitely wasn't enough when she heard his possible boyfriend's, hopefully just a friend's, voice in his room at the hours of the morning that Inko only saw with a chamomile tea and a notebook that she used to write all her worries away. She'd almost burst in and made sure Izuku was okay, but then she'd heard muffled laughter and something that sounded a lot like, "I'm glad I met you," from her son and agreement from the other. She'd listened the rest of the night for any funny business but only heard quiet laughs and then a booming laugh that was unmistakably an all-might video quietly coming from the worn laptop speaker. She made a note to talk to her son about a few things, then continued sipping her chamomile tea with too much honey with a worried smile on her face. Inko loved her son, and while so much of what she did wasn't enough, her love for him was an abundance she'd never tire of. If having secret friends and taking drinks from the kitchen and spending time in cat cafes or taking courses online was his way of dealing with the life he was living, then she'd do everything she could to make sure that the cupboards were always stocked with hot chocolate and that Izuku always had a spare notebook or two for people watching or learning something that she herself would never truly understand. Inko would make sure that anything Izuku needed her to be, she'd be just that. Izuku grinned as a message came through on his phone. He didn't really have many contacts around his own age and he hadn't given his number out to anyone either, but he did have a friend now, so he wasn't too concerned about the messages he'd been getting over the past month. He'd learned how to encrypt messages, so after the third message or so, he'd made sure their messages were secure. Izuku had been texting Crawler a lot. He still didn't know how the vigilante got his number, but they were good friends. He hoped they were friends, anyway. Crawler was nice and always told Izuku off whenever he put himself down, and he let Izuku do his homework with him. They'd both sit in Izuku's room and compare answers till the early hours of the morning. Crawler even taught him advanced history and a bit of self-defense. And he showed him the best escape routes from Aldra so he didn't come home with as many injuries and offered to walk him home or help Izuku deal with bullies in other ways. He felt happier too, waiting for the clock at school to let out before sprinting away from bullies. Then he'd get home, reheat dinner and go to the roof to hang out with Crawler. Then he'd go and do whatever he did between the times when he and Izuku saw each other. That was usually around the time got home, so he'd spend time with her too. Crawler had never said what it was, just that it was vigilante business. They'd been texting for a while now, been friends for a while now, and Izuku liked reading over the messages. It reminded him that he really had a friend now. No. Hey! Ever feel super bored in class and really want to skip? Rooftop hot chocolate in 20? Laughing face. Wink with tongue sticking out. Who is this? No. Ouch, I'm hurt. You really got that many vigilante friends that you don't need your OG. Crawler? No. Me? The vigilante crawler? I could never wink with tongue sticking out, wink with tongue sticking out. If you were a vigilante, would you be him? No. Probably winky face. Good to know. By the way, I added encryption so it's a secure line. Crawler? Dude, you're a mini genius. Please let me have your brain for my final exam. Smiley face HJ. Crawler? College sucks, sad face. I could go for some hot chocolate in place of an exam right now, carrot you carrot. J unless. If you've got an exam, would it be better to not skip? I'll have hot chocolate later though. Crawler? Sigh. You're probably right. Dim historic architecture, here I come, comma. Crawler? If, hypothetically, winky face, I was the vigilante crawler, would it be chill if I crashed on your fire escape while my mentor calms down? Probably's. You have a mentor? Sure. Come in, I'm just doing homework. The last were from the night before. Crawler had shown up and helped him with an art and photography course he'd found online, then left as though he was never there to begin with. While he was reading back, another message came through. Crawler? Eves. This is definitely not Crawler. Tongue sticking out, buit. If you want eraser analysis, then you gotta check out your local cat cafe. Smiley face. Crawler? Also, I'll be in the back corner, but it's Koichi when I'm not being Crawler. Smiley face. Probably's. Olive branch. Crawler? That's the one, laughing face. Probably's. I'll be there soon. He quickly put a few notebooks in his bag before running towards the door, hesitating, turning back to hug his mum and to let her know where he was going, then leaving quickly and heading for the cafe. Izuku saw Eraserhead immediately, buried under a pile of cats, with a person with long blonde hair sat with a hot drink and a cat on their shoulder at the table next to Eraser. He looked around and saw Crawler pretty easily. He waved, then wandered over to the counter to order. Except Sue was here. Sue was working here. That was new. She hadn't worked here before. The owner, Najimi, said they were going to hire help, but this was a little too unexpected. How long had he been stood there? Izuku probably shouldn't have come. Wait, he would have stood up. Crawler, Koichi. He said to call him Koichi. Stupid. Izuku suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder, glancing back to see Crawler there. It's okay, she just got hired a few weeks ago. She's really nice though, he said, just quiet enough for Izuku to hear. Then he smiled at Sue as she stood at the counter, just looking up from her sketchpad. Good, she hadn't seen him overthinking. Midoriya? Koichi hesitated, then spoke. Hey. I didn't know you two know each other. Sue, this is that guy I was telling you about. He joined the RPG about a month ago. He grinned as Sue looked a little surprised. Izuku looked over, curious and a little confused. Sue put a finger to her chin like she was thinking and said, that makes sense. Midoriya seemed like a hero nerd when we first met. Then it was Koichi's turn to look confused as Izuku blushed at the simple yet accurate description of himself. A hero nerd. Yep, that really was him, huh? He felt his cheeks warm from embarrassment, but his anxiety seemed to have eased up a little. He turned to Crawler. Sue and I met when I was climbing the fire escape to give hot chocolate to pro heroes from my rooftop. He explained, then felt a cat paw at his feet and scooped it up, glancing at the collar to check for a name. The green tabby pawed at his chin while he petted the soft fur between his ears. Crawler laughed. That's pretty close to how we met actually. A friend of mine said something about Mito's hot chocolate gig and I got curious. That reminds me, what can I get you both to drink? Caro, Sue smiled politely, a finger going back to her chin as she spoke. Both teens ordered and left Sue to get back to work while they retreated to the corner to watch Eraserhead interact with the cats. What RPG were you talking about? Izuku asked once they were comfortably seated. Koichi grinned from behind a cinnamon la. Oh, it's vigilantism. Well, anything in the underground really. It was just the safest way to talk about it without getting outed as Crawler. He nodded. That made sense. Then a cat ran towards him and away from Eraserhead. He petted the cat without thinking, a gray short-haired with a name tag reading, turquoise she-her, until he realized Eraser was watching him. He nervously waved at the hero, then looked away and tried to ignore the hero's gaze. He finally looked away after a few minutes. Hisashi knew their husband was a good man. He was amazing and beautiful and smart and funny when he wanted to be. But he was also a little oblivious to his actions when he had time off. Like now, he was resting his eyes while surrounded by cats in the local cat cafe while unintentionally staring out two kiddos on the other side of the cafe. "Show," he gently prompted, "you're scaring the little listener. He's been watching me for half an hour. I recognize him from somewhere." They sighed fondly at their husband's antics. He always meant well, always calculating and precise, but on days like this he let caution go and just existed. It was one of the things he loved about Shota. He was so unapologetically him and nothing could waver that. "Where do you think you've seen them?" "I don't know. I haven't arrested him and there haven't been any cases with Dash." Shota stopped, then seemed to relax slightly. "He's that informant I was telling you about." Hisashi watched his husband relax and then continue playing with cats who hid inside his scarf. They'd remind him of the three waiting at home before they left. The possible abuse or neglect case? They asked worriedly. Shota had told him about Eve's. Honestly, he could understand his husband's concerns. Sho nodded in response. The kid didn't look like he was displaying any trauma responses, but Hisashi knew as well as anyone that masking was all too real. They started subconsciously flicking their fingers as they watched the scene, only to find Sho gently pushing a fidget cube into his hands. He always had a fidget toy on hand for them or anyone else who needed it. "What do you think we should do?" he asked, brow furrowing in thought. Shota turned to him, sheet-eating grin back in its place. "Undercover work wouldn't go so well here. Plus I'm not great at kids, but you." Hisashi blinked a few times then sighed. This was either going to be fun or an absolute shit show where everything went ball up. Either way, they knew this case meant a lot to their husband, so, of course, "Just tell me what I need to do." They were all in. Their trip to the cafe ended after a villain attack nearby when Inko called Izuku and asked him to come home or stay with a friend. He must have looked lost in his head because Koichi was idly waiting for him to catch up with his thoughts while petting a small calico. He hesitated before speaking, then took a breath and decided to take a risk. "My mum said I've got to either come home or go to a friend's because of that villain attack. I know you mentioned living by the college, so would you maybe want to come over my mum will be theresotally jeditifnapa." He was interrupted by a light but genuine grin, not holding any disgust behind it. "Mito, Zu, my buddy, my pal, after living by the college, I got, maybe, mum, totally, and not but, which is an improvement on keeping up, but also not quite enough to understand fully. Can you say again?" Izuku could have cried. Happy tears, of course, but Crawler wasn't angry at the thought process being regurgitated into an unintelligible mutter stream, and even tried to understand said mutter stream. He nodded, then tried again. "Do you want to come over to wait out the villain attack? My mum's at home, so I get it if not, but it might be better than trying to get through the traffic." Koichi grinned. "You mean I finally get to meet the famous Mama Eves I've heard so much about?" He waved his eyebrows so Izuku knew he was only half joking and then dropped his voice to be more genuine. "But really, as long as we don't mention the whole RPG thing, or at least keep it as an RPG thing, then I think we should be good." Inko got a reply from Izuku pretty quickly asking if he could bring someone home with him. She grinned to herself as she realized she might be getting to meet his boyfriend. After shooting of a text to say it was okay, she began tidying the apartment and put on the kettle to make hot chocolates for the boys. Izuku unlocked the door and was followed inside by Koichi. While they were both taking their shoes off, his mum appeared in the hallway. "Izuku, how was the cafe?" "Who's this? A friend?" she asked, speaking quite quickly, but she was nervous. She wanted to make a good impression. "Hi Mrs. Midoriya, it's nice to meet you. I'm Izuku's friend Koichi," he said, waving politely. As he pulled his shoes off, Inko hesitated at hearing his voice, then looked him over and said, "It's lovely to meet you, Koichi. Would you like a drink? Hot chocolate or?" Izuku recently started drinking those energy drinks. He seemed nice enough but a lot older than Izuku. He'd introduced himself as a friend though. Surprisingly enough, it was Izuku who spoke next. "Is hot chocolate okay, Mum?" We had caffeine at Olive Branch and Koichi was just saying how broken his sleep schedule was. It was a relief when Koichi squawked and Izuku only laughed in response. Just 'cause it's true doesn't mean you've got to call me out." Izuku laughed openly and bumped his shoulder against his friend as they fell into laughter between them. Inko watched the interaction with a fond look. Izuku had brought home friends before, but he always seemed more relieved when they left and was always walking on eggshells while they were around. She'd ask questions that would hopefully guide him into seeing it, but he was too kind. Though watching the pair interact as they did, perhaps it wouldn't be so bad for Izuku to be friends with nice guy. What was his name now? Krulla? She made a mental note to search it later and maybe bring up a conversation about vigilantism later to get Izuku's perspective. Did he know about his friend's hobby? If he did, then was he taking part? It was dangerous without any kind of training. That was also something to think about. For now, she was just going to make some hot chocolate and get to know her son's new friend. The villain attack went on for a few hours, so Koichi ended up staying for dinner, which was great and he was very polite. But it meant that Inko didn't get to talk to Izuku about recognizing his friend as a vigilante until later that night. Apparently some villains had broken into the sewers. She hadn't really paid it too much mind. Pop Step and the punching vigilante were both on it, so Inko had tried to keep Koichi from worrying. His friends were keeping him up to date by text and everything was okay. Later that night, he'd said he had to get back for college in the morning, and then Crawler, that was his new vigilante name, had made an appearance just in time for the final blows to be traded. The vigilante trio disappeared quickly from TV and Izuku got a message from Koichi saying he was home safely. Izuku seemed to be buzzing when he read over the text, then he promptly sent a response and focused back in on the conversation with Inko. "So, Koichi seemed nice. How long have you been friends?" she asked, sitting down with a chamomile tea in hand and holding out a cup of hot chocolate for Izuku. He took a sip, then blew into the cup to cool it down for a second, something he did to gather his thoughts. "We met through a mutual acquaintance a few months ago, but we've been friends for..." His voice trailed off and he took another sip of his drink. Inko added extra milk so it didn't burn him too much. Izuku had a habit of drinking it too fast and he'd burnt his mouth more times than Inko wanted to think about. "Maybe 2 or 3 weeks. A month at most, but I'm not sure," he said eventually. A soft smile crossed her face. "I'm glad you've got a nice friend. What do you think of being friends with him?" Izuku broke out into a genuine grin, the first she'd seen when he was talking about someone other than a hero in a long time. "He's awesome. He tried to understand when I mutter and even tries to listen to the actual words. Then when he doesn't get angry or upset like Akio or Amiya. And he lets me do his homework from college." Inko took a breath in at that, and Izuku paused. "Mom. Sorry baby, but does he make you do his homework?" she asked carefully. It had been an issue before and she wanted to make sure her son was okay. Izuku shook his head. "No, he'll send me a copy and then lets me work on it too. Then when we've both done it we talk about it. He said I'm super smart and it's really cool to have someone to talk to. He likes heroes too, so he's studying art history and how artistic generations have impacted hero costumes and also hero sociology, so I get to learn about that too." Another smile settled onto her face, a welcome contrast from the usually furrowed brow that crinkled with stress from work of worry for her son. "That's where you've been learning about that? I did wonder why there were photos of all of Midnight's costumes on the laptop." Izuku buried his face into a pillow but didn't look embarrassed, just mildly irritated with himself. "I forgot about that." Then he looked up. "Wait, just Midnight? I tease baby. Snipe and Present Mike were there too. Also an underground hero I didn't recognize." She answered easily. Some of the irritation faded away. "Good, I was going to do a research paper on it but I got distracted and forgot about it. The underground hero is close with Midnight. I can't figure what the relationship is though." Inko took a sip of the chamomile tea, enjoying the peace and comfort of being at home with Izuku. "I'm glad you found yourself a good friend, Izuku." Inko said, "I just have one question. Is everything okay?" he asked, sitting up and focusing his full attention on her. "You and Koichi, are you friends or more?" She asked gently. Izuku coming out had initially been a shock. She'd accepted him easily, of course. Crying as she wrapped him in a hug and thanked him for trusting her enough to tell her. Then said she loved him more than she ever knew was possible with each new thing she was privileged enough to learn about him, and promised that her love was not despite but regardless of anything he came to her with. Inko was so proud of her beautiful boy and of everything he was becoming as he grew up and introduced her to each new part of himself. She had taken some time to come to terms with the idea. Of course, Izuku had spent enough time getting to understand himself, so he'd already come to terms with this part of his identity, but nothing had really changed. She could still talk about his first date with him and take photos before school dances and everything else that a relationship entailed. The only thing was she had no idea how to recognize if a boy he brought home was a friend or more than that, but she trusted her son to tell her these things when he was ready, and she could only hope he felt safe enough to do so. So she figured it would be easy enough to ask and hope he felt safe enough to be honest, whatever the truth was. We're just friends, he's sort of my best friend, I think. But it's different than how Kaken and I used to be, and we haven't really said we're best friends, so I don't want to assume dash. Inko smiled fondly at her son as he delved into the inner workings of a new friendship. The two spent the evening talking, and Inko found no red flags in Izuku's new friend. He was just a kind young boy who helped people in his spare time, and Izuku was most likely doing something similar, she discovered. If Inko went out and bought some pepper spray and other self-defense tools, as well as some wrist, ankle and chest protection that somehow ended up in a cupboard that she'd ask Izuku to get the Hoover out of, and if he happened to see the unused armor next to a box of Hisashi's old things, mainly fireproof hoodies, then that was between her and her only. She loved her son and she knew she couldn't shelter him forever, so little by little she'd have to let him live and trust he'd come home at the end of the day. She'd always taught Izuku to take anything he needed from the house and to never go without as soon as he was old enough to understand the concept. That lesson came pretty soon after. It's always okay to ask for help, and ask for advice from people who know their field better than you do. That night, when Inko heard Izuku climb the fire escape to get to the roof, she sighed, content that her son had a good friend who could look out for her son, just as much as her son looked out for everyone else. Then she shed a tear for her son growing up into someone she grew to be more proud of every day. To think, if she hadn't gotten lost on her way to a new job, she'd never have known Koichi as anything more than her son's friend. As it was, she could make sure they were both as safe as they could be and that they always had a hot chocolate at the end on the day, should they need it. Izuku climbed onto the roof to see two more vigilantes than he was used to. Pop Step, the idle vigilante, and one that he recognized but didn't know too much about. He was known for punching people though. Koichi was looking sheepish as the punchy one held him by the hood only a few centimeters off the floor. Pop Step was the one who spoke. So you're who Koichi's been spending so much time with? She said, sounding bored and throwing a look that said no matter how he replied it wouldn't be a good answer. Before he had a chance to doubt himself, Izuku turned to the best thing he knew to do, analysis. He could be braver than he was as Eves, someone people underestimated because he was young and lacking in experience but not because he was quirkless. He took a breath and spoke up. Izuku climbed onto the roof to see two more vigilantes than he was used to. Pop Step, the idle vigilante, and one that he recognized but didn't know too much about. He was known for punching people though. Koichi was looking sheepish as the punchy one held him by the hood only a few centimeters off the floor. Pop Step was the one who spoke. So you're who Koichi's been spending so much time with? She said, sounding bored and throwing a look that said no matter how he replied it wouldn't be a good answer. Before he had a chance to doubt himself, Izuku turned to the best thing he knew to do, analysis. He could be braver than he was as Eves, someone people underestimated because he was young and lacking in experience but not because he was quirkless. He took a breath and spoke up. I guess so, though. He let his voice get quieter for a second but ultimately decided against whatever he was going to say and instead going with, I'm Eves, I know you're the vigilante Pop Step but I'm not sure who you are, though I'd assume another vigilante given the context. He gestured to each of them respectively as he addressed them. The vigilante known for punching seemed familiar from somewhere. Couldn't place where. Regardless. Yeah, I'm surprised Koichi told you who I am. We haven't heard much about you. Pop replied, still looking bored. Koichi tried to speak but looked up at the punching vigilante and decided against it. Oh, he didn't. I'm a new informant, so it's sort of my unofficial job. Also, he turned to the other vigilante, what should I call you, because I don't want to get into a habit of calling you punching vigilante in my head. Koichi's eyes blew wide and Izuku was suddenly worried he'd be murdered today because of the look on his friend's face. A few beats of silence passed, and even Pop's step held her breath. Then the older man laughed. Loud and hearty and genuine, even if Pop's step and Koichi didn't quite understand why he was laughing and not planning where to hide a body. You're a bold kid. I go by Knuckle Duster. If I figure out where I know you from, I'll tell you my name, he said gruffly. So he recognized Izuku too. That was good to know. He could do some research and figure it out. Okay, he replied brightly. Well, can you put Koichi down? He looks really uncomfortable. Pop's step just looked confused now, and Koichi. Izuku didn't really know. Maybe bored and a bit confused too? Knuckle Duster did put him down though, a sort of half-smile painting his face with a look of bewilderment. You know what, you've got spunk, kid. I'll give you that. He glanced to the others to gauge a reaction. Pop's step face-bombed and Koichi gave him a weak salute before slumping over in defeat. Seeing the way they both reacted made him feel a lot more nervous than he'd planned. How'd you like to be our informant? Izuku froze. That was unexpected, but easy to deal with. So that was a plus. I appreciate the offer, but I just started out as an informant. I want to try and find my feet before I think about any team-ups. The three vigilantes gave him various looks that he struggled to place. Well, kid, the offer stands whenever you want it, Knuckle Duster said easily after a second. Come on, Pop. Let's leave Koichi and Eves. She glanced at Izuku, giving him a once-over before shrugging and following the older vigilante off the roof. Koichi flopped down, sitting cross-legged and sighing while Izuku copied. Social interactions were exhausting. The rest of the night passed quietly, with no major villain fights or hero interactions nearby. Maybe he should find a way to branch out a little more. He could help heroes with more than just analysis for the case that they brought to him. Izuku collapsed into bed the next morning before he had to get up an hour later, only to realize it was Saturday and not Friday like his phone had said at 1 minute to midnight when he checked if he would be needing an alarm that morning. Except he could smell the herbal teas Mum liked to drink, which meant she'd make breakfast soon. Izuku loved breakfast with his mum, he didn't want to miss it. He only got this on a weekend, the slow mornings where they took their time preparing for the day rather than rushing out the door and missing each other due to busy schedules. Heaving a sigh, Izuku forced himself out of bed and moved toward the bathroom to splash some cold water on his face and have a wash to wake himself up. It was Saturday, so Mum would be going shopping later, and Izuku would go to the library to get some more textbooks before they came home and made dinner together. They'd either be having ramen or katsudon, depending on which Mum chose at the store. Either way, regardless of how tired he was from his nocturnal informant gig, he was looking forward to the day ahead. Saturdays were always the best. Present Mike pulled up outside the building. It was just as nondescript as Shota described it. A couple of older folks were making their way in and out of the building, pulling trolleys behind them or holding hands with grandchildren. There were a few that seemed younger, though he would say the youngest person who lived here was not under 37. They climbed into the back of the hire van he'd loaned on the commission's name for a side gig. Realistically, they just didn't want Eves to get in trouble because they brought attention to him from the vultures. So, Present Mike was officially launching a JSL project from a rented apartment in hopes that they'd find out more about the other residents and therefore, Eves. Now he just had to unload and unpack the van. It'd be a good day if he at least spotted the kid, but they didn't have any expectations. Moving day was step one in what they expected to be a long, but not dangerously so, plan to find out more about this little listener and potentially help him if that's what he needed. After breakfast was cleared away, Inko watched Izuku leave to get ready and glanced at the envelope she'd gotten in the post this morning about a new resident moving in today and the main entrance being busier than usual, so to please be patient. Everyone would be, so the letter was more of a formality than anything else. She was happy to see more people moving in. It'd mean the landlord could update the building and that the big people at the top of the economic food chain would consider paying attention to the area. It just spiked her anxiety a little too high at the thought that living with someone who she didn't know in case they weren't accepting of Izuku. He was quirkless, and however wrong the bias and the prejudice was, it still put him in harm's way whether he hid it or not. He could either openly talk about it and risk physical or psychological harm from people who saw his existence as wrong or inhuman, or he could keep it to himself, his closest friends and the family they'd found together in the building, and risk the physical and psychological damage of having to hide a part of himself. It was something no good mother or parent would ever want for their child, but at the end of the day, it was Izuku's life, and all she could do is be there and support him in every way he needed her to, and hope that he let her be a part of his life as he grew up into a person, ready for a world that she didn't doubt would be taken by storm. She put the letter down by her purse so she'd remember to mention it to Izuku, and then stood to get ready. Saturday was the only day she had to get the shopping and chores done, where Izuku didn't have any plans either, so they always made a plan to spend time together. Despite her ever-present worries, Inko smiled and decided that whatever hurdles the new resident offered, she would just take them one at a time when they got to them and figure it out. She had a day with her son to look forward to in the meantime. Hisashi carried the first few boxes inside, then, seeing an elderly woman waiting for the lift, decided to take the stairs if there was anyone else around. It'd make it easier on their new neighbors too, and relations in these sorts of missions were crucial. He couldn't afford to damage them so early on. If the lifts were clear, he'd use them though. They sighed, and the endless task of unloading the boxes began. Izuku was a little nervous about the person moving in. They'd be living right below his window, so he'd have to be extra careful on the fire escape. He didn't have to say anything, and as long as they didn't recognize his shoes, he'd be okay. And if they did, then it was either a big red flag or a green one. Either they had family who were quirkless or they were quirkless themselves. Either way, he'd manage just as he always did, so that wasn't his biggest concern. He was lucky enough in that regard. It was a thought for later though. He'd seen the moving van out front, but the new neighbor was nowhere in sight. Probably taking a load of boxes inside. He'd see if there was anything to be done to help out later. Maybe he could ask Koichi if he wanted to come around and help out. If the neighbor seemed nice, that is. He shook his head and focused back on the walk to the store. What do you think? He only caught the last part of what his mum was saying. Sorry, I got a little lost in my head. What did you say? His mum smiled softly, that gentle reassurance that they'd be okay. She'd lost her smile for a while after they found out he was quirkless, so seeing it was a great reminder that they'd come this far and they would keep going. Just that I've noticed you drinking a lot more hot chocolate recently, so maybe we could get a few different kinds to try, Inko replied. Izuku nodded happily. You don't mind? I can pay some towards it if you need me to. He didn't want his mum to have to deal with that too. He hadn't thought about the cost of giving pros hot chocolate every night. He should find a way to pay mum back for that. There's no need for that, she said, and he was about to protest, but Inko halted in place and turned around to face him. I'm your mum, Izuku, and no child should ever have to worry about getting basic essentials. My mother never did more than what was necessary for her survival, disregarding all the foster kids' needs as secondary. He was the tears well up in her eyes, but they didn't fall, just stayed where they were. Inko never really cried when talking about her foster family anymore. She'd spent enough tears on them, and now all that was left were the phantom pains hidden behind the years of selfishness and self-growth. Inko didn't cry because she'd been hurt, but the pain wasn't something she needed to carry in her back pocket or drag behind her every day like a ball and chain. She'd been through the pain and she was through it. She'd freed herself of the guilt and grieved enough, so all that was left were the vague details of the maps that led her to be the person that she was and the ghosts of memories she chose to keep. She knew how to use every mistake and wrong her foster mother had made to be nothing like that for Izuku. I always promised myself that if ever I had a kid I'd do better, so believe me when I say, you never have to pay for more than the fun stuff while you're still young. You're not even working yet, she said, cupping her hands to Izuku's cheeks to make sure he understood. He nodded, then wrapped his arms around her. She smiled to herself, through the mist that threatened to dampen her eyelashes. Happy tears. She'd never be anything like her foster mother, and she would never abandon the people she cared about like her birth mum. I love you, Mum, Izuku said, muffled by her shoulder. I love you too, Izuku, Inko replied, and she prayed to any greater being or divine power that may exist in any realm of possibility that her son understood just how much she meant it. Izuku roamed the library after returning the 3 books he'd borrowed last week, then looked for the books he wanted before logging onto one of the computers and searching gifts to get for the world's best mum. An idea in mind, Izuku made his way to the store to meet Inko and help carry the bags. Getting back to the building, they saw the van still half full. Izuku hesitated. He knew the risks of strangers, but he also wanted to help people. It was why he'd become an informant of sorts, and if small acts would help, then that's what he'd do. He carried the bags upstairs and helped Inko put everything away. Then instead of reading, he could do that tonight on the roof. He only had one analysis to send off, so he'd have enough time. Izuku went back out to the front and waiting for the new resident to get back to the van. He'd offer help and see if the resident wanted it. If there were any red flags, he'd just leave. He didn't have to wait too long anyway. A tall person with long blonde hair pushed back into a messy half-up half-down bun and red eyes walked over. They were wearing a black t-shirt with the name of a band Izuku only half recognized printed on the front, camo pattern joggers, and had a gray hoodie tied around their waist. Hi, are you the new resident? He asked as the blonde approached. That's me. Do you live in the building? They sounded like a happy person. Nothing stood out as an immediate red flag. Izuku nodded. I saw the van before I went out a few hours ago, so I was wondering if you wanted help taking the boxes in. He explained cautiously. That'd be great. Are you sure you don't mind? Not at all. I like helping people. I've got to help make dinner, so I can't stay super long though. That was his way out if he needed it, and people were hesitant to be arseholes if they knew someone was waiting nearby. Okay, just don't overload yourself. The boxes are a bit heavy, so be careful lifting them. The stranger answered easily enough. I'm Yamada Hizashi, by the way. My pronouns are he, they. Yamada said, lifting 2 boxes. Midoriya Izuku. My pronouns are he, him. He replied, it's nice to meet you. We haven't had anyone else move in for a while. Izuku lifted a box and followed Yamada inside. I'm Yamada Hizashi, by the way. My pronouns are he, they. Yamada said, lifting 2 boxes. Midoriya Izuku. My pronouns are he, him. He replied, it's nice to meet you. We haven't had anyone else move in for a while. Izuku lifted a box and followed Yamada inside. Yeah, the landlord said something about that. They said, leading towards the lobby, I'm on the 3rd floor, so we can wait for the lift. Izuku nodded, then pressed the button while balancing the box. It didn't feel too heavy, but definitely had enough weight in it that his legs might ache tomorrow. I'm on the 4th floor, so I'm used to the stairs, but I'm not sure I could do them with boxes more than once. Yamada laughed, though not maliciously, and said, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. I tried not to block up the lift earlier, and it definitely replaced a workout. Oh, do you have anything you'd recommend doing? I've been trying to train more, but it's difficult to find things that work online. Izuku tried not to bounce too much in the lift, instead just rocking on the ball of his feet. I've been using weights and doing stretches and core stuff, but was he talking too much? Running is a great way to build up stamina. I usually work out with a friend or 2 to keep me motivated as well. It depends what you're working out for. They explained, partially matching Izuku's energy while still being a little out of breath from the boxes he'd moved before. Mostly for self-defense, I think. He said quietly he couldn't be a hero, but he didn't let go of the idea that he needed something. He'd given up on being a hero as long as he could help people. He knew it was an unattainable dream. So why? You're not planning to go into heroics? Yamada asked, innocently. Izuku just shook his head. It's never been an option available for me. He settled on. The lift doors opened and he stepped out, effectively ending the conversation. He knew Yamada meant no harm. He understood that so many kids wanted into heroics for some reason or another. So, why did he feel guilt at the red eyes glancing cautiously in his direction from behind? Okay, so maybe shutting down the conversation wasn't the right choice. I like helping people. Izuku stated as easily as a fact about the weather. and I wanted to be a hero but I'd get in the way in the field. It tasted bitter to say, and then I read about vigilantes. They found a way to be heroes even without licenses, so I figured I could do something similar. He hesitated, then realized what he said and what that would insinuate. I'm not a vigilante or anything, I just meant if I can help with things like this. He gestured to the box in his arms, then that could be enough. That's very noble. Just be careful not to tread too far into vigilantism, Yamada said. They sounded. Izuku wasn't sure, soft but genuine and careful in a way that he wasn't used to. The words didn't linger and burn with caution linked to his lack of a quirk. Just there, suspended between two strangers in a way that sounded. He couldn't place it. So, why did you move in here? If you feel comfortable sharing. You don't have to or anything, Izuku mumbled. He really just wanted to change the subject. Actually, I won't be living here full time. I started a sign language school and needed a venue. A friend of mine suggested the building and it's en route to my other jobs, so it works out pretty well. Yamada replied easily, deciding not to mention that this would be their fourth job, after UA, before the radio and between cases for hero work. This kid was the informant that Sho was so worried about. The whole reason he'd gone undercover was to make sure this kid, Midoriya Izuku, was safe. You know sign language? The kid asked, looking at Hisashi with full eye contact for the first time. His eyes were practically shining. Michim. I've always loved languages, so I started learning it in high school. They grinned back, careful that their expression didn't look malicious or dangerous, just exciting. Thank whatever gods were out there for that WikiHow page he found in his first year at UA and the hours of practice to make sure his face didn't. They shuddered at the memory of their childhood photo album. They could be glad their face didn't really do that anymore. That's so cool. I started learning a while ago, but I never had anyone to practice with. The kid looked so happy, it made Hisashi smile at the unfiltered joy on his face. Well, if you want to come along, classes are on Thursday. He offered. It was open-ended and had no pressure attached. The kid's face dropped a little though. What time on Thursday? He asked shyly, excitement dwindling a little, much to Hisashi's despair. They hesitated. I was thinking about between 4 and 5, but I'm always happy to practice if that doesn't work for you. Hopefully time was the only issue. Oh, that works. And I can still keep most of my schedule as it is. He smiled, excitement returning but less fiery than before. That made sense. The kid's phone rang before he could reply and he answered it. Hey mum. A pause where the other end of the line, the kid's mum, said something and the kid replied, yeah, I'm just helping the new neighbor carry boxes but I can come home. Another beat. I think so. Are you sure? Thank you. I'll be back in an hour. Love you mum. Love you. They waited until he hung up and put his phone away before asking, everything okay? I've got an hour before I need to make dinner with my mum, but I can still help out until then, the kid explained, a relaxed happiness crossing his features. Well, I appreciate it. Hey, remind me to get you a leaflet for the JSL club so you can have a bit more information. They're in one of the boxes still in the van. He said, performative casualness as present Mike Silent cheered at how well this mission was progressing. The hero and kid continued small talk for an hour before Midoriya left for dinner. Mike texted Shota the kid's name and everything he'd discovered while heading into the building's lobby to leave some leaflets. The JSL club may have been a cover, but it was still a club and they planned to keep it going if it had a lot of interest. Hopefully it'd do some good for the area. Midoriya Izuku was incredibly bland. Not as a person, he was a really interesting kid with a life and friends. Aizawa wasn't sure, but he'd gotten closer with the vigilante crawler, and a potentially dangerous hobby, but on paper, his file and records had nothing with noting. He'd had a lot of medical issues as a kid. Thanks to privacy laws, Shota couldn't access the information without a reason, but he seemed to grow out of the doctor's visits with time. The fact that he was quirkless was confirmed too. Shota knew from the supremacy case he'd taken to the kid regretfully. He hadn't known until the quiet ask to please ensure the Vic would be okay after the fact, but he'd had a suspicion since then. He wouldn't be talking to the kid about it, of course. Nothing needed to be done about it just yet. Zashi said the kid's mother seemed okay from what he picked up with. They'd overheard the kid on the phone and from the way he talked. He'd wait for now, keep trying to learn more and make a good plan for what to do next. The kid would be okay for now. Maybe he could earn some trust by updating him on the case with the quirkless girl. She was doing okay. They'd put her in a foster placement with one of Joke's sister's friends, so it would be easy enough to check up on her. Izuku couldn't not smile while he and his mum worked in the kitchen to make dinner. It was the kind of moment that made him feel so at ease when in the midst of their chaotically busy lives, he could just relax and breathe. He was happy to be, the relief from existence pouring over him as he stirred pans and got Walhi to laugh at almost colliding with his mum while they both reached for the embroidered tea towel she'd sewn a few years ago. She'd found a class online and signed herself up, a week of video. Classes later, she made 3 tea towels, added a small eraser in gold thread onto what had become Izuku's favorite hero backpack and done the same with a hoodie. She'd embroidered designs onto bags, t-shirts, hoodies, dresses, tea towels, cushion covers and various other things that decorated their home. She was a creative person and Izuku was glad to see her taking the time to do something for herself. "So," she said gently while they worked on preparing dinner, "what did you think of the new neighbor? They seem nice. Actually, he's not moving in. He just needed a space to start a JSL class. I was thinking about going along. It's on a Thursday, but before put your hands up is on. I have a leaflet too," he said before remembering the most important part. "Oh, also, his name is Yamada Hizashi and their pronouns are he, they. They like music and have cats and he lives with his husband." Inko hummed, keeping up with chopping peppers from the sound of the knife on the wooden chopping board. "Did you ask how many cats they have?" she asked lightly. They continued to talk into the evening about Inko's work, Izuku's classes, and anything else that sparked a conversation. Inko went to bed at around 9 p.m. and Izuku made a hot chocolate and a coffee before he climbed the fire escape and continued to research his recent project. It was something he'd started recently and he wasn't sure how far it would get before it either collapsed in a pile of wasted time and failure, or he was shut down for something so positively outrageous. "What you working on?" Crawler looked over his shoulder and Izuku suddenly closed the laptop down, accompanied by a squeak of surprise. "You need better situational awareness," his friend said nonchalantly. "I'm better when I'm actually trying," he half pouted. "It was just a project to pass the time but—" Izuku hesitated, looking 3 buildings over before he says, "I think that's Eraserhead. You want to hide out downstairs?" Crawler grinned, his brow furrowing slightly. "Nah, I'll give you scary friend privileges for the night," he said, stepping back as the hero landed on the roof and his scarf looped back around his neck. "Eves, Crawler," Eraser greeted. Koichi groaned, "It's Crawler." He corrected, exaggerating the sound of his vigilante name. "I just wanted to give you this." The hero held out a manila folder with 3 pieces of paper inside. "It's a copy of the concluding documents from the Quirk Supremacy case, and something the girl requested that I pass over to the one who saved her." Izuku just blinked, unsure how to respond. Words failed him, so he cleared his throat and tried again. "Thank you, I really do appreciate it," he replied, then took the file and Eraser nodded in response. "You did good, kid. I'm just on patrol for now, but if I get another case that I need help on, I'll come back for your help." Izuku was unsure of the truth behind that statement, so all he said was, "Thank you," with a small but. Why did his confidence come and go in waves? Why couldn't he just be better? Do you want a coffee or hot chocolate?" he asked, pushing those thoughts away for another time. For now, he could smile and talk to the hero on his roof until he read the file and then collapsed into bed after a long day of human interaction. Maybe that was why. He'd gone out with Mum and then spoken to Yamada and then gone right into cooking? He couldn't stop. He wouldn't sacrifice one thing for another when both held equal value. To Mr. Eves, "Mrs. Joke said you're the one who saved me from my dad. She said you knew what to do but you couldn't be there in person, so I wanted to say thank you. Not a lot of people have been kind since I got diagnosed, so I didn't believe the heroes when they said someone wanted to take care of me at first, but then Mrs. Joke told me that you asked to make sure I was okay and that she and her best friend both promised because you're a nice person. That gave me hope. If you're a nice person, then maybe there's other nice people in the world too. I hope I get to meet them someday and I hope I get to meet you too. Thank you for saving me again, even though I'm quirkless. Anya, thank you for writing to me. I'm glad you're safe now and you don't need to thank me, you deserve to be saved regardless of your quirk. If you ever need help, you can always ask Miss Joke or Eraserhead and they both know where to find me. Us quirkless people have to look out for each other, after all. You'll find some nice people in the world, I promise they're out there. I've also sent some information for your guardians of places that helped me find some of the nice people. If you ever find yourself in one of the places, ask for Midori, that's me, just so you know, and if I'm not there, one of the people I trust will make sure you're okay with anything you need. You'll be okay, Anya. Just give yourself time to grow and try not to be too hard on yourself. Izuku folded the 2 letters, slipping the one from Anya into the envelope he'd stuck into the back of his favorite, and most long-term, notebook while putting his response into its own envelope to pass on to Eraser next time he saw the hero. He also put a comment on the quirkless chat room that if any kids came looking for Midori to contact him and a brief description of why. No details, just that he was helping a few heroes and he told them some information to save the girl from a quirk supremacist. A comment said their parents were really angry because the group was being investigated too. Izuku made a note and sent a message to Tsukachi via the Hero Network chat room. Eves, RHA hello, I just wanted to check an information source. Did you open an investigation into a quirk supremacy group after Anya's case? I won't ask any information that's classified, just for confirmation. Lie detective, yes, a case was opened but we haven't been making any headway with it. Tsukachi, have a few things that might help. File 1.info.pdf, File 2.methods.pdf, File 3.destruction.pdf. Eves, RHA that covers most of what I have. Lie detective, thank you, I'll see to it that this reaches the right people. Izuku blinked at the screen, that was so open-ended and he really hoped he hadn't made a mistake. Eraser said he could trust Tsukachi with this sort of thing but just giving away his analysis was somewhat terrifying. His brain had gotten him hurt, and he was smart enough to know it could get other people hurt too. He'd been careful of which names to give, and hadn't spoken about anyone quirkless, only the ones who'd hurt people and couldn't lead to quirkless victims just yet. If the police proved to be safe, or at least this one detective, then Izuku would continue to use him as the main contact for his Eve's work. If not, he'd find someone else. He'd be okay. He would make sure everyone would be okay too. It was fine. He still had a few plans to fall back on and he'd make sure no one else got hurt. Realistic expectations be damned, he would save everyone. Sue felt that she was slowly getting an idea of what Midoriya was like. Not fully, and she was smart enough to know that he would definitely keep secrets from her. She was basically a stranger to him, it was expected that he wouldn't be sharing every detail about his life with her yet. But he was still a paradox of sorts. He was anxious and shy and skittish and he worried easily but he was confident enough to talk to pro-heroes and offer them hot chocolate. He more often than not mumbled to himself while writing in a notebook that looked damaged and as though it would fall apart if the wind blew the wrong way, but he handled it with such care, and despite the ever-present flow of words he was quiet and always bit his tongue. Sue knew how cruel society was, she'd seen the affects of cruelty firsthand, but Midoriya was her age. She still hoped the damage only broke him, that it hadn't had time to steal the parts that had shattered so he could still heal and his heart could be fixed. She hoped to see him become someone healed and grown with time. For now, all she could do was be friends with the boy she met on a broken fire escape and wait for time to turn around. Sue felt that she was slowly getting an idea of what Midoriya was like, until he came into the cafe and completely threw her off course. "Hey Sue," Midoriya had said, greeting her as usual, only his eyes seemed sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. "Can I get a coffee?" He smiled, less sincere than his regular smile and more forced with a practice that made it almost unnoticeable. "Sure." She got busy making the drink before she turned back to him. "Are you okay today?" She didn't want to cross boundaries, but she had to make sure her friend wasn't going to collapse from lack of sleep. He blinked, taking a moment to register the question before nodding. "I found a new special interest or hyperfixation, I'm never sure which, so I sort of forgot to exist for about," he glanced at the clock, 33 hours? "I'm okay though." He at least had the sanity left to look a little sheepish at the confession. "Whatever you were doing must have been interesting," she said, hardly noticing the "caro" that left her lips after the sentence. Midoriya just shrugged. "I'm going to be working on it for a while. It's just in its beginning stages at the moment though." He took the coffee, drinking half before his eyes widened, and he must have realized how hot the liquid was. Sue only offered a water from the mini fridge under the counter behind her and let Midoriya have a minute to recover. "Thanks," he choked out. She just shrugged. "So what's this project about? Something else for your RPG?" Midoriya just shook his head. "It's sort of related but not really. More loosely inspired by it. I don't want to talk about it too much this early on in case it doesn't go anywhere." "Fair enough, Kuro." Sue had a sip of her green tea and honey. "Have you seen Koichi recently?" "He hasn't been by the cafe. I think he had a busy week with exams and such," he replied. "I think he said something about coming by on the weekend though." She nodded. School was never easy to balance with life. You both could use a reminder to not overload yourselves. Midoriya only flushed lightly and agreed. Sometimes all you can do is forget to think about it, at least until thinking about things doesn't hurt. He whispered more to himself than her, and Sue got the impression she wasn't supposed to hear that. Whatever Midoriya was working on, she hoped he would learn to balance his own emotions and well-being too. "I should get back to work. Go home and sleep after you finish your drink." Midoriya left after half an hour, and Sue found herself once again thinking about the paradox that was Midoriya Izuku. From Notebook 9.1. Project Q, start of research notes. References cited in the end pages and collected in Notebook 9.1b. Official project name to be determined. 20% of the population is registered as quirkless. It's expected that statistic is higher, but due to variations in different countries, living conditions, income and medical insurance, documentation, quality of life for marginalized communities, laws as well as disability accommodations and social views, it's estimated that 30 to 35% of the world's population are quirkless, with some being unregistered or having falsified medical records. Fake quirks such as heightened taste or seeing more or less colors. Need more about this? Generalized to the 7 continents. Out of 20%, -7% are 50 or over. -4% are 30 or over. -6% are 20 or over. -3% are under 19. Reasoning for statistics. Suicide rates being higher in younger generations. Bullying and treatment has become more common. Medical neglect due to ignorance, lack of knowledge on pre-evolved bodies, biases, lack of protection laws for abuse, negligence, and discrimination. The lack of frequency can be accounted for by data leaks of 2XXX. And issues mentioned prior. Note to self, follow up with Japan-specific information after coffee, sleep, and food. The bell rang whilst Izuku was gathering his books from the floor. If he was quick, he'd still make it before any teacher noticed his disheveled appearance and absence. They never took much notice of him anyway, unless it was to give him detention for something clearly not his fault or accuse him of cheating when he got any higher than 70% in anything. "Deku." The teacher acknowledged him while he picked himself up off the hall floor. "Surely your mother isn't too busy to teach you the appropriate way to behave in public." He cringed internally. The man had 3 ex-wives and 5 children with 5 different women, none of them ever considered a 5th date with him, and he knew nothing about how to parent. Or even how to stick around long enough to learn. He had no right to bring up his mother's parenting when all he himself could do was kill a child in Sims through willful ignorance alone at best. Of course, saying that was not an option. Or not a smart one, or a feasible one at least. He made a note to contact the mothers of the man's children with information on child support payments and the consequences of missing said payments. "Sorry, Sensei, I'm just clumsy," he said instead, pushing up on the floor and dusting down his uniform. "I'll get to class now." He was one of the less dangerous? Was that the right word? To us. Willful ignorance and standing complicit was more than an issue in and of itself. Add a desire to cause the systemic issues to spread like a pandemic, and that danger grew tenfold. Regardless, the teacher was one of the less dangerous people. Yes, he still caused harm, but the abuse never physically hurt him. He wasn't safe, but he wasn't in danger of his life. And maybe that thought process was damaging in and of itself. It worked short-term though. Once Izuku got to class, he scribbled a quick note for the levels of danger, how categorizing safety was dangerously close to becoming complicit despite how much it did to keep quirkless people safe, and then he folded it into the bottom of his backpack and took out his homework, ignoring the papers being thrown at the back of his head. Just another day. He ignored the bruises and scrapes, focusing solely on getting through each hour. Bakugo screamed, teachers picked on him, and his classmates threw insults his way like it was a hobby or some sort of twisted target practice. They hit and hurt every time. Izuku was just growing numb. It was fine. It was just another day. He could go home, check the hero networks for anything new that he could analyze and feel useful. He'd text Koichi and ask his friend how his art history homework was coming along and see if he could help with any new works his friend had so they could compare homework notes. It was Monday, so he wanted to read up on some sign language, so he wasn't going to Yamada's class without knowing anything. He could ask if Koichi wanted to come along too. It would be fun to have a friend in the class. Maybe he could ask Tsu to come along too. It was another day. Izuku would go home, pick the papers out of his hair, use a little bruise cream, and then have a good rest of the day. By the time the last bell rang, he could feel the insistent glare on his back, the prickling discomfort chasing him home, until the apartment doors closed and he climbed the stairs to his home. This building was safe, so whoever was watching him wouldn't hurt him here. Perhaps it was naive, but if he couldn't relax here, then that was it. It was essentially giving up on the hope that, even without a quirk, nothing would change for the better. He sent a message to Koichi, letting him know he was back from school but just had to shower before they could hang out. The reply was a photo of a purse snatcher and a thumbs up. If he was doing vigilante work, he wouldn't have a chance to reply properly right away. The photo, or even just emoji, something Koichi didn't use often in his texts unless he couldn't type for whatever reason, helped reassure Izuku that his friend wasn't ignoring him. He should probably work on that too, but for right now he just wanted to shower, fix his hair, and get started on homework. If he had time after, he'd start on developing the note he'd thought of in class. It was just another day. Getting home, Izuku ran into one of his neighbors in the hall while he was getting out of the lift. She smiled at him, worry etched into the furrowed brow as she noticed the bruise on his forehead from where he'd been shoved into the banister while picking up his books from the floor the third time that day. "Do you need some ice for that, honey?" she asked, smile still in place. He returned the smile. It was fake, but that would only be an issue if she'd spot the tells. "It's okay. Mum's got some cream that'll make it go away by tomorrow. It's not that bad." It was a lie, but it let his existence be slightly less painful. The less people worried, the less it hurt to think about the consequences of getting hurt. She nodded, smile tight. "Okay, you come by for dinner or I'll check by again later this evening if Inko isn't home. It's fine either way." The older woman told him. She didn't always make sense right away. Was she inviting him for dinner? Possibly. Giving him an option of joining her for dinner or her checking in later if he stayed home for dinner? Most likely. "Okay, I've got a friend coming over for homework, so I'm not sure if I'll make dinner tonight," he said, still smiling to try and reassure her. "That friend seems to be doing you some good. You seem happier, Izuku." The lines on her forehead faded, just a little, just for a moment, hardly enough to be noticeable. "If you ever need anything, never hesitate to knock on my door or any other in this building. We all care about you and your mother and would hate to see you hurt," she chastised lightly. Izuku felt himself flush a little with embarrassment, but he was grateful to his neighbors. He went inside after a few more minutes, throwing a towel over the mirror so he didn't have to see the mess of scars that spanned his body while he showered before putting on a playlist and climbing into under the water, letting the heat relax his muscles. After 5 songs he began washing his hair rid of the paper and not as surprisingly as he'd like, plastic from what was either a water bottle or some cheap school supplies. He heard Koichi tap on the window. Izuku hurried up and threw on a t-shirt and some shorts before going to meet his friend, who was earlier than usual. "Sorry, Present Mike started patrolling my vigilante area. Which is great for people, but I'd really rather not get arrested," he said, collapsing into the desk chair and spinning once. "Dude, are you okay? What happened at school?" he asked, suddenly very worried. Izuku just shrugged, "Just the usual. I just got out of the shower so I haven't sorted my hair yet," he answered easily, going into the bathroom again to grab a comb, a frizz control cream and a spray bottle of water. His hair wasn't healthy but he washed it every day so he didn't expect it to be. He just needed to get to high school, then he needed a plan. "I'll just be a minute," he said before getting started on his hair while Koichi watched. He watched for a while but eventually turned to start on his homework. Izuku joined him soon after and they spent a few hours on that before going to the kitchen to fight with the new, quirk-improved, microwave over dinner before giving up and ordering a pizza. Just another day that finally started to look up. Shota knew a lot about the world. That wasn't a boast, it was just true. He'd learned a whole lot about how people coexist and how society had learned to grow and develop into what it is today. He knows that his experience puts his knowledge above average. It's simply a fact as much as the sky is blue. He isn't, however, naive enough or willfully ignorant enough to think he knows everything. There are closed societies that he hasn't yet glimpsed into, and he knew he'd live a lifetime alongside so many others without any insight into the happenings that he wasn't privy to. As much as he was a hero, he wasn't foolish enough to believe he could save everyone. But he'd be dead if he didn't work out how to save Eves. The kid was right there, just in front of him and just out of reach. The kid was smart, brave, generous, honest and overall a kind person with good, genuine intentions. The young informant had saved a young quirkless girl from a horrific and abusive situation, all for something Shota would have completely overlooked. Then he'd reassured the victim without even his presence and asked Shota to make sure her protection and safety was continued into her new living arrangement. So he'd asked his husband to help him find out more about the kid. Mike had applied for an apartment to host the Psy language school they'd been planning to start up for some time, and he had his first lesson tonight, so all they could do was wait and hope that the kid would show. He'd been a little hesitant at first but, all being well, he'd know the best way to save the kid soon enough. When Mike had spoken, they hadn't noticed any immediate red flags. There were some, but they were more orange at worst. They'd gotten some information about the kid too, but not a whole lot. It was fine. The kid would be okay. Until Shota figured out how to help, Eves would be okay. The bright, kind and genuine kid with a spark for the industry and analysis and more potential in his left foot than his class that year had combined, who reminded him of Oboro with how much he smiled and let his light shine despite the cracks in the world around it. He wouldn't get hurt, because Shota couldn't fail while he tried to save him. Zashi was excited for the sign language class later on, spending the day bragging to the staff of UA and his first student who'd be showing up later. Shota watched fondly from his sleeping bag in the corner, happy to hear his husband excited for this. Some things were just made to be but not to last, as Shota and Hizashi would find out soon enough. Katsuki glared at the nerd. Deku had been acting differently ever since that slime incident. He'd stopped carrying those shitty stalker notebooks everywhere. He still wrote and muttered about whatever, but it was quieter. Like he'd either finally learned his place or was planning to quietly overtake and try to prove he was better than Katsuki. He was the best, not Deku. He'd prove that the nerd was below him and would forever be a quirkless bee. Deku would accomplish nothing and everyone should know it. He was still being kept in his place by the extras, and he'd finally quit with the first quirkless hero bullshit. The teachers didn't need to tell him off for cheating anymore. The nerd had gotten stupider and couldn't get above a 68 in anything. He dropped down over time as the work got harder. It always irked him when the nerd used to get better grades and when the stupid teachers accused him of cheating. Katsuki knew better than that. Deku didn't cheat because he practically obsessed over stupid shit that wouldn't do anything for him when he became nothing more than a mindless factory worker or another stupid job that didn't need any thought behind it. Deku didn't cheat because, as much as Katsuki hated it, the BSTRD was smart enough not to. At least he was falling behind in classes now. So why was he so happy? He watched while classes passed, the papers stuck into his hair doing nothing to Deku's posture yesterday. He was small and practically invisible anyway, but he'd shrink back on himself if he was the old Deku. He'd flinch whenever anyone looked his way and he'd hide away because he was nothing but a goddamn effing coward. So why the F was something different? Yesterday he'd been fine. Today he looked FANG excited for something. He set off a few small sparks in his palms as the thought crossed his mind, earning a quiet nod from the teacher followed by good control Bakugo, before he returned to the lesson. The BS student just wanted points for knowing a hero when he graduated from this shithole. At least the dumbass nerd was still flinching. He still knew his place as a pebble for Katsuki's path to success. He would make sure he couldn't forget it after classes were done with. Midoriya bit his cheek, hardly noticing the taste of blood while he walked through the classroom door, pretending he was unaware of the whispers that had been following him all day. He changed his shoes at his locker, hesitating at the eyes on his back before he decided to take the risks sooner and get it over with. He tucked a piece of paper into his pocket with the address of a clinic that would treat him if it came to that, and then he ducked into the bathroom and wrote his age, name, the phone number for his home to say he was okay but give no details, and that he had no allergies or medications on his arm. If this went as badly as the twisting feeling in his gut suggested, he wanted to be prepared. Leaving the school, Bakugo's footsteps were heavy, but there were at least 4 others who also had issues not stomping the halls of Aldra in his class too. Izuku heard 5 sets of heavy footsteps and 2 others that were lighter. He was wildly outnumbered and knew the risks, but he wasn't fast enough, so running wasn't an option either. It was helpless. He quickly made a call to Koichi. When his best friend picked up on the second, he almost cried, "Don't call anyone. I'm turning on my location. If I don't text in 20 minutes, I need you to dash. Deku bisuri." An explosion went off beside his face and he dropped the phone. His location still wasn't on. He heard a crunch. One of the attackers had stomped on his phone. Hopefully Koichi would know he was coming back from school. His face hurt, ears ringing. He felt something like a shooting pain through his middle and his shoulder felt hot. He couldn't hear. His ears dash. Something was wrong. Horribly wrong. He felt himself throw up, throat burning. Hot tears stung his eyes. Too hot. It was getting dark too. Izuku had to get up. What was happening? Distantly, he felt something hurt again. His face felt hot, tears falling down his cheeks. Then it was quieter. He still felt buzzy, but at least it was quieter. Something hurt in his stomach. His breathing was shallow and each breath felt like a chore. He felt hot, skin burning up, and his body hurt where dark black and blue bruises were spreading over him. He was almost certain his back and arm was bleeding too. His shoulder was definitely burned and blistering. His cheek felt hot too. Did he burn his face? His ears were buzzing, like TV static or radio silence. The static faded, while Izuku watched the world grow darker as stars climbed into his eyeline. He knew light pollution ruined any chance of stars, but they felt safe, so he kept his mind of them. Koichi was panicking. His friend was in trouble somewhere and told him not to call the police. He didn't know what else to do when the call got cut off before Izuku had time to tell him where he'd be or turn on his location. Throwing on his vigilante outfit and desperately calling Izuku back to no end, he sprinted to his friends before tracing steps back to his school. Yes, he said to wait 20 minutes, but that was too long. For all he knew, Izuku was hurt and bleeding out somewhere because he'd made an enemy in the time he'd been an informant. It wasn't a completely unreasonable, however much he hated it, after Eves had saved that kid. No time. Wrong thoughts. He had to find Izuku. Focus of finding Izuku and making sure he was okay. Koichi was so busy running past alleys and small entryways that could hide an injured teen, mind focusing solely on that he missed the tall blonde in a white t-shirt and leather jacket heading in the opposite direction before they called out to him and started chasing. Crawler really didn't care who was chasing him. He'd find Izuku and make sure his friend was okay first. Being a hero meant prioritizing the rescue to keep people safe so they didn't have to worry. Hisashi was surprised to see a vigilante running down the street. That in and of itself wasn't anything surprising, but the look of sheer panic on Crawler's face made him hesitate, checking to see who was chasing him. After seeing nothing but confused civilians, they turned and sprinted after him to figure out what could have happened to spook him that much, calling Shota as a precaution on the way. They hated that they'd be late to their first sign class, but they had to make sure no one was in danger. This area didn't have a lot of coverage from heroes, so it wasn't guaranteed that someone else would get there in time if they didn't go now. Crawler turned a corner onto the side street. There was an overpass, so he felt his heart stop as all thoughts ground to a halt. Izuku was unconscious. There was blood. A lot of blood. He had blood in his mouth, and Koichi may not be a doctor, but he'd seen enough doctors' shows through late-night study sessions to know that could mean a whole lot of bad things. Punctured lungs were a very real possibility after getting kicked in the chest. Oh shit. And Izuku's arm was bent back unnaturally, twisted around inside of his uniform. There were burns too. So many burns. That was just at a distance, the first things he saw. Which meant there would be more. Damn it, if he got arrested for assault, it wasn't anything on what he'd make certain happen to those BS. Hey! He screamed, feeling his throat clench. Get away from him. Crawler ran to Izuku's side, punching the blonde one on the way and shoving the others away, either by swiping their legs or just plain shoving them. Shit, Aizu? You gotta wake up. You've got to wake up for me. Leaning down to hear his friend's breath. It was weak but there. Barely. Izuku carried a first aid kit. He'd said he always had a first aid kit after a paper plane race left Koichi with a particularly annoying paper cut. But his bag. Distantly he heard footsteps and the group say something about leaving now before he realizes. That was fine, he'd deal with them later. Most of the blood was from a busted lip and nose. Looking through the bag, his hands fumbled on a little piece of card that dropped out as soon as he opened the back zip. It had an address and a note, saying to go and knock on the door at the address twice. Was Izuku expecting this? He looked up, wanting to see the attackers' faces one more time for a police report, but saw Present Mike, hair down but otherwise in his hero costume, holding the kids by their collars like something out of an anime. Sheet! He cursed out loud. He knew Izuku had to go to a back alley clinic. That was the address then. Quirklessness was one of the leading causes of medical neglect. It had caused countless unnecessary deaths in the quirkless community. It would be fine. It had to be fine. Is he breathing? Koichi nodded, still fumbling with the first aid box to try and do something. Good, then check his back. Bruising over his ribs isn't the best sign. Eraserhead instructed. The vigilante wasn't sure when he got there but was grateful for the instruction. I don't know what I'm doing, he needs to stay alive, I need him to be okay, he started saying, panicking about the fact that his best friend was a bloody mess and laying unconscious under the overpass. Eraser knelt beside him. The damage doesn't look too bad, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. Unless there's a reason, I'm going to have to take him to a hospital. Koichi nodded. Yeah, okay. Okay, I'll take him to a clinic near here. Can you meet me on Eve's rooftop in a few hours? Be careful not to jostle his ribs too much and be careful when you get to that clinic. It's one of the better ones, so it should be okay, but still be cautious. The hero said, I'll deal with the legal side of this, so just make sure that he can start healing. He swallowed, feeling tense but nodding. Crawler picked up Izuku, careful not to jostle him too much like Eraser had said, and ran in the direction of the address. Hopefully Eraserhead and Present Mike would deal with the arseholes who hurt Izuku. Right now, he had to make sure his friend was okay first. The clinic didn't look like much. Outside it was just a metal door between two office buildings, one of which looked completely uninhabited and the other seemed like it could easily have been neglected for care and overused by those too busy to care what the place looked like as long as they had work. When he knocked, a young person about his age opened the door and gestured him inside. We'll take him, Midori comes by quite often. They said, leading him to wheelchair where he was probably supposed to put Izuku down. I'm staying with him. Koichi said firmly, I'm not leaving until I know he's okay at the very least. They looked back, eyeing Koichi for a moment. You must be the new friend he's been hanging out with. They said at last. It was only seconds, but while Izuku was unconscious in his arms, it felt too long. They let him inside further. We were glad he found someone he got along with, even if we lost him when he wasn't spending too much time here. There's a few chairs stacked up by the desk. I'll take him through, and if you wait, I'll make sure to bring you updates as often as I can. He felt himself relax. If you show me where you need him, I'll carry him through. It'll save him from getting moved around too much. Right this way, they said, leading him to a room with a cot for Izuku and medical supplies around. Koichi put Izuku down, waiting off to the side, while the other teen checked him over. He's definitely going to need surgery on his arms. Possibly his right leg too. His lungs seem to be intact, but I'll need to check for smoke inhalation. Are you okay to stay in the waiting area while I get someone to do surgery? If you've got somewhere to be, I can call Miss Midori. I'm staying. Just dash, the words shocked him, getting stuck before they could materialize. They looked over their shoulder, already cutting away the singed uniform. I'll make sure he's okay, they said, and Koichi backed out of the doors and sat in the waiting area. Finally, he let the situation sink in, as did the realization that Izuku had prepared. He had Ifinji written the address of a clinic and given instructions if he was found unconscious. Realizing Izuku's reality hit him like a train, and Koichi just felt numb, despite the tears welling in his eyes. Crawler sat on the hard plastic chair in the waiting room and watched the clock tick by at half the speed of time. The teen, he learned their name was Hinata, had been coming to give updates, but it had been 2 hours. Izuku had 3 broken ribs. He'd bitten the inside of his cheek off, which they hadn't realized until he started choking on the flesh. It was a miracle Izuku hadn't choked while getting to the clinic. He also had damage on his ear, resulting in quite a severe burn around his neck and jaw that'd most likely scar. That was without the broken arm and leg. He had a road rash on his back and a minor brain injury that was being worked on currently. Hinata had said Izuku was strong and healthy enough to make a good recovery after the surgery. He noted how they didn't mention the surgery itself or make any promises aside from providing updates as often as they could. Then they came out, looking sullen. I can't guarantee anything for the next half an hour, they'd said. His heart stopped for a few minutes, but we managed to resuscitate him in time. Koichi took a stuttering breath and pushed the heels of his hands into his eyes at the words that were trapped in his mind. Izuku was fine. The next update said he was more stable and things were looking positive. It had to be fine. He looked over his contacts. He needed to call someone. He needed to hear someone's voice tell him he wasn't going to be alone. He wanted someone to wake him up from this nightmare so he could go and drink hot chocolate with Izuku and talk about random stuff while sitting on the roof of his apartment building under the light-polluted sky that hid the stars in the dark above. He wanted to be naive enough to still be afraid of the dark, instead of the very real possibility of his best friend being thrown into an endless abyss. What was on the other side anyway? If Izuku didn't pull through, would he be safe? Would he come back and find Koichi again, or would he have to relearn how to live without his best friend? Or was that just the end? If Koichi didn't save him in time, if he spent too long panicking, if he wasn't fast enough. He's okay. Hinata interrupted his thoughts. The clock had ticked further away while Koichi was distracted. The teen was calling out of the door with the blood-soaked plastic apron, still washing their hands and a small reserved grin on their face. The surgery went well and he's in a cast until I can get someone to come in and heal his bones later. He stood up, dropping the unlocked phone and disregarding his hands trembling at his sides. But he isn't, can I dash? The words all stuttered and stumbled on his tongue, praying that enough eye contact with Hinata would telepathically translate his muddled thoughts. Their eyes softened, almost like they could understand how Koichi felt. He wasn't the first to almost lose someone. But after being the one to carry the near-dead body to a clinic that actually cared enough to help him, instead of a hospital. How cold Izuku had felt. How the unsteady heartbeat against Izuku's ribs ricocheted through him like a bullet. How much it ached to imagine going back to life without his friend. He'd done it before, but it seemed so impossible to return to. How for a while, Koichi wondered how he'd tell Inko that he failed to care for her son and to save him when he needed her. How could anyone understand that? For a while, he'd felt more lost and alone than he ever had before. No amount of sympathy or empathy could ever chase that feeling away. Do you want to see him? Hinata asked, a vague understanding in their tone. Koichi nodded, following the blondish redhead out of the waiting room. His breath caught. Relief and loss and grief and fear twisting in his stomach and getting caught in his throat. Nothing. Absolutely nothing could have ever prepared him for seeing his best friend in the cot, held down by monitors tracking his breath and heart and everything else. The kid who was learning to live larger than life, the informant Koichi saw grow and learn and want to keep growing and learning, but that kid was nowhere to be. Soon. In his place was a frail shell and the rhythmic beeping of his heart. It looks worse than it is. Hinata said somewhere distantly, he's stable, just coming down from anesthesia which could take a few hours. The monitors are mostly precautionary, but after his heart stopped dash. He felt himself nod in acknowledgement. The words didn't fully register though. His mind only took in that Izuku was okay and repeated it like a broken record to try and reassure him. This was all done by people who knew Izuku, who saw him regularly but didn't see a person, just someone less because he was born different. The thought reignited something in his chest, the thought that people could be so cruel from being so young. Can you keep an eye on him and call me as soon as he starts to wake up? Tenan hummed, of course, but why? Where are you going? To make sure Izuku never ends up here because of them again. His determination steeled and Crawler put together something of a plan. He needed to find Present Mike and Eraserhead. They had the authority to make sure something happened, to ensure that this wouldn't be brushed aside. Hisashi was waiting on the roof of an apartment building for a vigilante and hopefully an informant too. Midoriya was a good kid. Aside from the questionably legal hobby, he seemed nice. He'd been exiting about the sign language class that was supposed to happen that evening. Present Mike. Crawler appeared beside him, glaring at the skyline with a cold determination sewn into his anxiously furrowed brow. His jaw was set stiffly and his hands were balled into fists at his side, the trembling almost unnoticeable where the vigilante shook from a mixture of nerves and anger. This was someone ready to kill for the people he cared about. Crawler. Is Midoriya okay? He's out of surgery but not awake yet. He said, almost relaxed for just a second. It didn't last and his expression hardened again less than moments later. I need to talk to you about the BSS who hurt him. Mike nodded. He'd never heard the vigilante curse before, but it wasn't important here so he ignored it. Yes. I've got 3 of them in custody currently, but without evidence we can't hold them for long. We really need something, even if it doesn't pull through for the long term. How long is left? Another few hours. They answered, mind racing over possible solutions or scenarios if this didn't plan out right away. Midoriya would of course be taken out of school and offered an alternative. They should talk to his mum too. He seemed close with her. Shota was currently talking to the woman to try and identify if the teens had done anything like this before. Okay, I'll get you evidence. Just please hold out as long as you can. The vigilante pleaded though it wasn't necessary. Mike would make sure nothing like this happened to the kid again. Shota Aizawa didn't know what to expect when he knocked on the Midoriya's front door. It certainly wasn't a woman quoting the laws. On vigilantism at him with the threat of 1,000 lawyers raining hell on his career if they'd questioned her son without a lawyer present. Mrs. Midoriya, it's not that. I came to ask you if you're aware of your son's history with bullying. He tried, but seeing the woman's expression harden further told him he'd probably made a mistake in his wording. By that I mean, are you aware of his bullies? He quickly clarified, which seemed to be enough that Mrs. Midoriya wasn't going to attack him on her son's behalf. I'm sorry, do you know where my son is? She asked, and Shota noticed the phone in her hands. The small frame hid exhausted worry behind the unquestionable care for her son and unwavering, unconditional love she wore like armor and a shield. He may have misjudged the situation entirely. Your son was hurt after school. His friend took him to get treated. He didn't know what else to say. In hindsight, he should have found out where the clinic was in this area. Right? Well, thank you for telling me, but I need to go and make sure my son is okay. Anything else, and excuse my bluntness, can wait for now. Thank you for your time, Eraserhead. She picked up her purse and made a move to step past him. The abrupt tone layered with genuine concern was surprising, but hearing someone he'd never met before use his hero name to address him wasn't expected. And even less expected than that was Crawler running almost into him with tears in his eyes and a relieved smile on his face. Inko-san. He's waking up. The vigilante called, hardly stopping to shout the name of the clinic over his shoulder. Hisashi had watched a steel resolve turn titanium. Crawler was fully intent on finding everything that could help put Midoriya's bullies away. They were glad anything would help, and they were planning on looking into his school too. Shota was speaking to Mrs. Midoriya, so if anything about his home situation didn't seem okay, they'd be able to help. All evidence combined, it seemed they'd reached some sort of conclusion. He'd started listing evidence, small things he'd noticed that could easily be used while the vigilante thought out loud. He noticed Crawler's foot was tapping impatiently, the thoughts blurring into choked words. Hisashi asked, "Hey, are you okay?" when he stopped to take a breath, only to see misty eyes when Crawler looked up. "What happened?" "Eve's nearly died today." "He did die for a while in surgery." Crawler swallowed thickly as though the truth was choking him painfully. He took a breath. "I can't let him down." He choked out. Hisashi rested a hand on Crawler's shoulder, offering a warm smile that he hoped was reassuring. "Practice from his time in the spotlight and all. You won't let him down. You did everything right. I'm sure Midoriya would be proud of you." Crawler looked up, legs trembling below him. "I just wanted to be a hero." His voice cracked, suddenly seeming so much younger than he was. He looked at Present Mike and Hisashi. Thought he saw something flash behind Crawler's eyes. It was gone no sooner than he saw it, so fast it was anyone's guess as to if whatever it was ever truly appeared. "I just wanted to help him," the vigilante whispered, choking on the spaces between the words. His legs buckled, folding underneath him with the weight of everything that had happened. Hisashi knelt down. "Crawler?" he said, trying to capture the kid's attention while he grasped at breaths. "Crawler, look at me." To his credit, he did look up. Teary eyes and all. "You were a hero today. You saved his life and you did everything you could. If it wasn't for you, that boy wouldn't be okay right now, but because of you he is going to make a recovery," Mike said firmly, holding the level of certainty in his tone that he knew could comfort victims and adjusting his tone and pitch so Crawler would begin to feel calm again. He had a note, a guide, instructions. He had it written on his arm, so if he was found Crawler scrunched his eyes shut, feeling sick as pictures of a crumpled bloody body flashed in his mind. How many times does this have to happen for that to be something he feels like he has to do? He asked, voice small and broken. Present Mike didn't know how to respond. There wasn't a response that truly would help here. The kid never should have had to end up here. Before he had a chance to respond, Crawler's phone vibrated and he answered quickly. There was a moment where it was quiet, then everything happened at once. Koichi had jumped up, tears in his eyes, and called out, "He's waking up," while he sprinted back to the roof access. It was too bright, and everything hurt. That was Izuku's first thoughts when he came to. Eyes closed but already burning under the aggressively flickering lights. He really should try and find a way to fix that. HeroTube had tutorials for everything, so it couldn't be too difficult if not for the time. Everything hurts right now though, so he'd have to wait a while before looking at a screen again. Without opening his eyes, he tried wiggling his toes, moving his ankles. Both felt tired but not too bad. His left side distinctly felt worse. He tried bending his knees only to get a stabbing pain that made him hiss at the feeling. His throat was dry and he felt sick, feeling something move inside his leg like grinding bones. Suddenly he was coughing and spluttering. A few seconds later someone was at his side and he had a mask over his face. Oxygen, he thought, taking long, slow breaths. He reached up to sign thank you only to realize his arm was held in place by a cast. Broken then. Not the worst but definitely inconvenient. Careful. This was one of your worst stunts, Hinata's voice said above him. Midoriya opened an eye and gave what he hoped was a questioning look. Road rash on your back, mostly third and a few areas bordering on fourth-degree burns. You bit off your cheek, broke ribs and an arm and a leg. What the hell were you doing? They listed off his injuries and gave him a curious look. Izuku sighed. I walked home, he said plainly. Hinata's face fell into understanding. They knew how cruel people were just as well as Izuku did. Your friend seemed really worried, they said, changing the subject and moving to check on the beeping machines beside the bed. And murderous, they added. Murderous. Brown hair, super fast, All Might hoodie? That friend? He asked incredulously, voice rising in pitch slightly and irritating his concussion. He winced and focused back on trying to stop the room spinning. Hinata nodded, hardly looking away from whatever they were doing. It hurt too much to look back. Yeah, that's the one. He was terrified when he brought you in, cried a bit in the waiting room while you were in surgery, Then after he saw you were okay, he told me to call as soon as you started waking up and left to go commit crimes against whoever made you end up here. Izuku felt his chest squeeze. Do you mean that literally? Yeah, he swore to make sure nothing like this happens again. Good on ya for making a friend though, they said, stepping back out to let someone in after hearing a knock at the door. A few minutes later, Koichi barged in and Izuku gave a small smile, noting the lack of blood to indicate that his only friend had slipped a little ways beyond vigilantism. Sheet, Koichi breathed before rushing forward and wrapping Izuku in a careful hug. Izu, you scared the hell out of me. Okay, give him space. He's still healing and hugs aren't gonna do much more than aggravate his injuries. Hinata said, stepping back into the room behind Koichi. I'm okay, Izuku said, not really aiming the words anywhere in particular. The bruise on his neck made speaking painful, but it was manageable. No worse than the deep-set ache of his bones where he tended to crack like a glow stick without the perk of actually glowing. The pain was accompanied by a warm feeling in his chest. For the first time he had a friend who cared about him, who visited him while he was hurt. He didn't like being hurt all that much, but having someone who showed up. The door opened again, interrupting his thoughts, and Izuku saw his mum rush in, followed by Eraserhead and Hizashi, who looked like... Oh no. Either that was one hell of a cosplay or Hizashi was present Mike. He died. This was hell. Or if he didn't die, there was a strong chance he was getting arrested for some form of vigilantism. So prison and upsetting his mum, or hell on earth. Great. Just great. Why else would two pro-heroes show up? Izuku, are you okay? Inko asked, hurrying to his side with worried eyes and unshed tears. This was all too common. It wasn't a regular thing by any means, but frequently enough that this was the first place Inko thought to call if her son ever didn't come home. Hinata went over his injuries, commenting how he might struggle to speak for long times for a while. He can go home in a few hours, he'll be okay, but I just want to keep an eye on him. That all right, Midori? Izuku sighed through his nose but nodded. Eraserhead looked at present Mike. The blonde seemed to understand a moment later and a realization dawned on him. Oh, right. You said you can sign? Izuku nodded, brows furrowed in worry. He knew vigilantism was illegal, but he'd been careful with his informant work. He'd made sure he told people he wasn't a professional source and worked with every law there was. If anything, it would probably be for public disturbance when he ended up sprawled across a frequently used footpath. He swallowed nervously and raised his hands. A little, I still need a lot of practice. Okay, I can translate. How are you feeling, kid? Present Mike spoke, signing along with his words too. I've been better, but it's okay. Do you remember what happened, Eves? Eraserhead asked, also signing along, but he was less practiced than present Mike. Inko shot him a look and he flushed, slightly embarrassed, that his mum now knew about his informant work. It would be fine, he could figure it out. Izuku blinked. Yeah, I got into a fight after school. He knew how this worked. Same script as always. Koichi gave him a look, silently asking what he meant. He looked back, hoping that he'd understand why he had to lie. Koichi did not understand. It was a hate crime. He said bluntly. The BSTRDS from his school attacked him while he was walking home. I was on the phone with Eves when it happened. Mike looked at the vigilante, then back to Izuku, who was decidedly not looking at anyone in the room. Eraserhead was the one who spoke next, kneeling beside the bed and meeting Izuku on his level. Kid, we're not just brushing this off. We know you're the one who got attacked. We just want your account of what happened so we know who attacked you and can make sure they're dealt with. You're not in trouble. Izuku blinked a few times, feeling his chest ache. This was new and the script wasn't going to work here. He felt out of his depth and lost, but then those last 4 words registered in his mind. He wasn't going to get arrested, which meant the heroes were here for him. I'm not? He asked, still uncertain. No, you're not. You got hurt, that's not your fault. But we want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Eraserhead was honest, a little blunt, and he tended to say it exactly as it was. Something Izuku had learned from the times he'd visited the rooftop and left with a hot chocolate or coffee. It was reassuring. He swallowed, then winced at the metallic taste of dried blood from his cheek. He really should have thought to clench his jaw before he got punched in the face. I dash. Use sign Izuku, his mum gently reminded him. Thank you, but you can't stop it from happening again. I'm used to it, it's just… He hesitated, hands dropping to the threadbare blankets. Eraserhead wouldn't want to work with him again after this, and neither would most of the underground when they found out too. Swallowed and closed his eyes, blinking back tears and signed, I don't have a quirk. It can't even be classified as a hate crime. People get away with it, other kids in school and teachers. I know how this goes. There's nothing to do without just wasting time and resources. Present Mike finished translating and had a look of horror on their face. Is this something that happens often? They asked. Izuku shrugged and then nodded. Not usually this bad, mostly just small things. Spider lilies or eulogies on my desk ruining my books, and quirk practices are probably the worst. I'm pretty lucky, I've only been hurt like this maybe 15 times though. Lucky? Koichi sounded outraged. Aizu, you shouldn't get hurt at all. Don't the teachers do anything? He sighed again. No, I get blamed for most things that happen. They don't hurt me or anything, but they don't stop it either. The admission stung. He didn't want to look up. He didn't want to see the way his mum was cracking, lines on her forehead growing deeper with every word. He didn't want to see the way the heroes were going to call him a liar, just like the teachers and everyone else. He didn't want to see the disgust on Koichi's face. He couldn't imagine the script being too different by the time this was over. Sure, right now it wasn't quite right, but it would be back to normal soon enough. Inko-san, please tell me he isn't going back to that school, Koichi asked, worry clear in his voice. I'll figure it out. Unfortunately, this school is the only one around and homeschooling isn't an option at the moment. Izuku felt his chest ache again, knowing he was putting his mum through so much just by existing. What do you mean? Present Mike asked. Perhaps we should speak outside. She replied, Izuku needs to rest and recover. We can handle this when he's had a little time. I'll stay, Koichi said, already pulling out his laptop. No screens with a concussion, Mike said. I've got audiobooks? On a low volume. Okay, we'll be outside if you need anything. They said, and then all three adults filled out of the room. Izuku still didn't look up. Koichi began playing a fantasy series with traditional folklore elements. There was a kitsune and other mythical creatures, elements of action, and it followed the story of a hero. The two boys listened in, Koichi occasionally asking if Izuku needed the lights or volume lowered. He felt something in his chest still aching at the fact that Koichi hadn't left yet. That he was still staying around and how much more it was going to hurt when he left because Izuku would forever wonder when the turning point was. When did he decide to leave? Was it when he got that phone call, when he saw Izuku broken on the floor and having to bring him to a back alley clinic rather than a hospital? Maybe realizing how dysfunctional his life was, how much he was going to deal with his whole life because of his lack of a quirk. Or maybe that hadn't been decided yet and Izuku, unable to do anything and lay in the cot staring at the ceiling while his best friends stayed by his side. The weight of silence was only punctuated by an audiobook because he couldn't even look at a screen. The voice in the back of his mind spat, the words sounding like venom. It was right, Izuku felt useless. I've tried everything, Inko said honestly, standing in the hall surrounded by closed doors, empty rooms and second-hand medical machinery. His school give him detentions for things that aren't his fault if I call, he comes home injured so I've begged the nurse to treat him. She says she doesn't know how to handle a hysterical quirkless, she added air quotes. I've threatened lawyers, spoken to my best friend, her son used to be friends with Izuku but since his diagnosis, they've lost the friendship they once had. Lawyers, police, private detectives, none of them take this seriously. I work 2 jobs so I can't homeschool him, and Aldera is the only school that will let him in without a quirk safety certificate. She said, tears spilling over as the cracks in her face began to show. I don't know what else to do other than stocking the medicine cabinet and making sure he has a safe place at home, that he's okay but I know he isn't. It's all I can do but it's not enough. I know that. A sob cracked through the air like a bullet, neither hero needed to see the other to know they were going to save Midoriya Izuku. Please, if there's anything you can do, Inko pleaded, please help my son. Mike held out a tissue, Inko took it graciously and tried to hold back the flood of tears that had been building for so long. We're going to do everything we can, they promised. Your son is a good kid, he deserves to have the same chance in life as everyone else. Inko looked back up, still crying, still holding strong. Before she had a chance to respond, Eraserhead cleared his throat. Perhaps there's another way for Eves, or Midoriya rather, to get an education. He said. Inko and Hisashi both shot him a confused look. Of course I'll be talking to a friend in the police department, but the best way to prevent this in the future would be to remove him from the situation until something more permanent and assuring can be done. What were you thinking? Hisashi asked. I can teach him. He answered, completely deadpan and serious. I'm sorry, you can teach him? What do you mean? Inko asked. Shock seemed to be a good enough pause on her tears, though her eyes were still glassy. Yes, both Present Mike and I teach at UA, so we have teacher's licenses, though I expelled my class this year, so I'm only needed as a cover or substitute. If Midoriya wanted and you agreed, I'd be willing to take him on as a personal student. He said, as though it was simple. Inko looked a little skeptical at first, and so Shota pulled out his wallet, handing her his staff ID card. She inspected it a moment, then asked, but why? I understand opening a case, but this, her voice trailed. And he knew it was a lot. For someone who had been given much less than they deserved, as the Midoriyas had, it was a lot. My class had no potential and more fantasized ideas about this job than real desire to do good. It was a dangerous combination and would have been a death sentence. Your son helped us save a little girl based on a photo of the contents of a bin. He distributes some of the most accurate information and analysis I've ever seen, and he's already helped more cases than most third years in UA. It's even more impressive when you realize he has no formal training. He has no kind of rose-colored glasses over his desire to help, and he understands that there's more to heroics than a strong punch and fame. That's something rare. Even if he chose to take a different path than heroics, he has potential. He deserves a chance to have that grow into a life and career for himself. Inko gave him a watery smile. I think you should tell him that. Lord knows he doesn't hear it enough. And as for teaching him, I think he'd be overjoyed to have his favorite hero as a teacher, but maybe we should wait until after he's recovered so we don't give him a heart attack. She smiled gratefully. Thank you, Eraserhead. Present Mike, truly thank you. Izuku heard 4 people come back into the room after an hour. Koichi was nearly asleep and the clock on the wall said he was already late for school an hour ago before the headache set in and everything was too bright to leave his eyes open. Izuku, baby, are you awake? His mum's voice said and he nodded. Yeah, Mum. It's just a bit bright, I'm okay, he answered softly. Who else is there? At least his throat was beginning to feel better. Eraserhead and Present Mike brought a detective friend. He wants to know what happened. Izuku swallowed, the burning sensation helping him to calm his nerves. They wouldn't be here if they didn't see a reason. Most law enforcement just ignored him, so this? It was new, but he didn't feel unsafe. The lights flicked off, the room no longer spinning through closed eyelids. Izuku finally opened his eyes, looking around at the people in the room. It's nice to formally meet you, Eves. I'm Detective Tsukachi. I emailed you about the Magpie case most recently. Inko shot him a questioning look. Izuku didn't know how he was supposed to respond to the look or what exactly the question was, so he just smiled, hopefully reassuringly, and looked back to the detective. Did you manage to solve that one? Yes. Everything but the paperwork. The whole situation was put down to a quirk accident and handled peacefully. Nothing was lost, and our Magpie now has a therapist to help with kleptomania, and will be receiving a box of shiny things as you suggested. The detective pulled up a chair and sat at the foot of his bed. Thank you. Because of you this case hadn't been mishandled and the man with the magpie quirk can have a fully functional lifestyle with the help he needs. Izuku felt his smile becoming a little less forced. I'm glad. He said genuinely. I told him you were the one who connected that he wasn't stealing things for no reason. He asked that I pass this on. The detective pulled an ivory-colored envelope from his pocket and handed it to Izuku, who thanked him and gently set it on the table beside him, saying he always got too emotional with the notes so he'd read it later. Eraserhead spoke up when there was a gap in the conversation. Midoriya, we need to know what happened. Who attacked you? Izuku twisted the thin blanket around his fingers. It happens a lot. It's not usually this bad, usually just a few burns or cuts, or my stuff gets destroyed sometimes. People say mean things. Yesterday was just something felt off. I knew they were going to do something bad, but I didn't know it would be that bad. He was looking down at his lap, fingers twisting around the blankets. The machines were whirring away and the steady beep that had been grounding just felt like something urging him to snap in his mind. The pain in his throat was helping. He felt like he could keep going as long as he ignored the noise of the equipment monitoring his vitals and heart rate. He tried to ignore it and focus on the conversation. How did it feel off? Detective Tsukachi asked. Izuku went over the day, how it had been quiet, how the worst of it was a few explosions set off behind him but not directly aimed at him. How he had felt unsettled, and knew that he'd be getting followed. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last. He'd been surviving long enough to know that. Half an hour later, Izuku had spoken about everything with the detective and two heroes and his mum listening. His throat was swollen and sore by the time he was done, and his eyes felt heavy. Tears and exhaustion tugged at the corners of his vision. "Thank you, Eves," the detective said earnestly after he'd finished explaining what happened. "I'll make sure this reaches the right people. You deserve to be saved just as much as everyone else you've helped does, and I apologize for the failures that let things escalate this much until now." Izuku couldn't help the tears that fell from his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely, then switched to sign, glancing at Present Mike to translate. They nodded. "You got it, little listener. What do you want to say?" "Thank you for listening and not calling me a liar or telling me I'll just need to get useful to it." "Isn't close, it's used," Present Mike corrected, signing along with the word. "Used to it." Izuku adjusted. "Of course, you should never have to get used to abuse and suffering. Have any officers said that to you?" Tsukaki asked, barely concealed anger bubbling to the surface. Izuku hesitated, lifting his hand and biting down on the corner of his nail nervously as he nodded. He dropped his hand and waited for the other coin to drop, for Tsukaki to finally snap at him, but the detective didn't. He took a breath and nodded to himself. "That can be a conversation for next time. I'll leave you to rest and recover. Email anytime, Eves." The detective stood and bowed his head, turning to leave. Eraserhead and Present Mike both followed after him, promising to come and check on Izuku once he was home. The door clicked shut behind the three adults, leaving Inko, Izuku and Koichi in the room. Koichi was asleep in a chair, leaning his head on the mattress beside Izuku's hand. How he slept through everything was a mystery to Izuku, but his friends seemed exhausted. So was Izuku. Inko reached out and held his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Her eyes were glassy, but her hair and clothes were still her. The extra lines that worry had etched into her forehead within the past 24 hours carved guilt into Izuku's chest. He silently swore that he'd make plenty of progress on Project Q and ensure that his plans were put into action sooner rather than later. "Rest, baby. It's been a long night. You'll need your strength to get better," his mum said, her other hand brushing some of the curls back from his face. Izuku closed his eyes and let the comfort of having his family with him be enough. The rest of the world could wait outside. At that moment, Izuku just wanted to sleep. Aldra Middle School was an underfunded and run-down mess of a building. The people inside were even more so. Shota Aizawa didn't know what he expected, but seeing how kind and generous and honest a fault Midoriya was, he had a little hope. Walking into reception with Detective Tsukachi and Present Mike was an experience in and of itself. Two students were sat on two small plastic chairs. The receptionist hadn't even looked up to acknowledge them. "Hello," Tsukachi greeted after 2 minutes of awkward silence. "I'm Detective Tsukachi. I'm here to speak to Bakugo Katsuki," and he listed off another 4 names. Eves had been hesitant to give them up, but after asking if anyone he'd saved deserved to continue worrying their abusers were going about their lives without consequences, he'd reluctantly written the names down. The receptionist wordlessly gestured them in after looking over her glasses at the 3 and Tokachi's badge. "Thank you," he said politely, leading the 2 heroes through the small office to the principal's office in the back. "Welcome. I'm Principal Kimura. We spoke on the phone." A short man with brown, graying hair and a gray suit greeted them, shaking Tsukachi's and present Mick's hands, forgoing a handshake with Aizawa but not skipping over him completely to not look him up and down judgmentally. I must say, I was surprised when I got your call, but of course, it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the talent we breed among students here. Mike felt mildly uncomfortable at the phrasing of that but didn't mention it. There were more important things. He looked across and Shota looked just as irked by it too. That was reassuring. We are busy. Is it possible for you to show us where the correct classrooms are? Hisashi said, being careful to keep his tone neutral. Of course, right this way. The man stood, puffing out his chest as he did, trying to appear bigger than he was. It's truly an honor to have such an esteemed hero in our school. Present Mike, truly an honor. Principal Kimura rattled on. Hisashi was usually more concerned with his fans, but currently, they were fixed on the open classrooms and the students firing off quirks. 1 or 2 accidents could be expected, but a complete lack of regard for safety. How many incidents or injuries went unreported by the teachers? They felt sick. No wonder Izuku had to handle so much before now. Here we are, the principal announced, then pushed open the door. No one was even pretending to work, but what caught the hero's eyes were the red spider lilies lying on the empty desk in the middle of the room. The class quietened down and the head teacher, blocking the door, addressed the students. Students, I know you're all working very hard, but we have some very important visitors for you. He stepped aside and looked back at the 2 heroes and the detective. Tsukachi went in first, followed by the heroes. Can I speak to Bakugo Katsuki? He listed off the names and 5 students raised their hands. Tsukachi nodded. Eraserhead and present Mike moved forward, pulling out 5 pairs of quirk erasing H&D CFFS. You're all under arrest for illegal quirk use, harassment, verbal assault, physical assault, assault using a quirk, and attempted murder. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney and your legal guardians are being contacted. Tsukaki announced as he led the 5 students, 4 of whom were silent or crying while Bakugo was yelling angrily. What the F dash? This was all Deku's doing. That BS dirty shitty nerd. He yelled out, adding more and more aggressive slurs and insults and threats that definitely wouldn't be helping his case. Thank you, Principal Kimura. I'll be in contact. The detective said shortly. The man tried to protest, claiming there had to be some misunderstanding and asking what they thought the students had done. Eraserhead activated his quirk on Bakugo after he tried letting some small explosions off in his palms, but once he was cuffed, he was left yelling angrily as he was walked out of the building. The 5 students were put into 2 separate cars and driven to the police station to be processed. Not one of them would be getting off easily after this. Izuku fumbled with his key, trying and failing to get it into the lock. After a few tries, Inko gently took it from him and opened the front door. Koichi helped him to the sofa while Inko set 2 bags of food down in the kitchen and a bag of clothes Izuku had worn in the clinic beside the washing machine. She turned around to Koichi fluffing pillows and pulling the coffee table closer so Izuku could prop up his leg. A pillow appeared under his arm, no longer wrapped in its sling but still in a cast until the bones healed. Inko put a light blanket over the TV, pulled the curtains shut so the room wasn't as overwhelmingly bright, and then disappeared into the kitchen for a minute. It had been 2 days since Izuku had woken up. 2 days and he still couldn't believe that Eraserhead and present Mike were leading a case against Bakugo and the others who had attacked him. Koichi appeared next to him with 3 notebooks, 2 empty, 1 for Project Q, 4 pens, his laptop, and a charger. Also noise-canceling headphones and a pair of present Mike sunglasses that Izuku had never seen before but looked insanely cool. In case you need a break from noise or light. They also block out blue light, but you should still be careful, he said, laying everything out within Izuku's reach so he could still use the arm he hadn't broken. Thanks, Izuku smiled in response, for sticking around with all of this too, he added a little more quietly. Koichi hesitated at that. Aizu, you're my best friend. I wouldn't be anywhere else, he said, a level of certainty and seriousness in his voice that made Izuku hesitate. He looked at his friend, scrutinizing his tired appearance, and tried to find a tell that would let him in on whatever was underneath the words. He didn't have to look far to see the way Koichi was anxiously stimming, tapping each fingertip to his thumb with one hand. He patted the sofa next to him and shuffled closer to the arm. Koichi sat beside him, sitting on his hands, decided that was too uncomfortable and just locked his fingers. Izuku didn't say anything, just sat quietly in the space and let the distant sounds of his mum making dinner. Koichi hesitantly took a breath, chewing on his lip and his leg bouncing. The silence stretched between them for all of a minute, broken by the sound of the gas on the stove sparking to life under a boiling pot of water. Koichi took a breath, exhaling shakily before he turned to Izuku with tears in his eyes. "I was so scared I'd lost you, Izuku," he said, not quite crying but something close enough. Izuku felt himself take a sharp breath. "What?" he whispered, throat suddenly dry as the reality set in. He knew that he wasn't going to live forever. Mortality was never something he'd had to come to terms with. The consequences of his life, though, that was a new thing. Izuku never had more than his mum to consider. And she was strong, she always bounced back. But he was growing and gaining more friends and people along the way. Eraserhead, Sue, and even present Mike and Anya, the neighbors who were there for him and his mum. Then there was Koichi, his best friend and the first person with no obligation who chose to stick around. They all mattered to him. Losing people left scars. He just never considered that losing him would be consequential enough to scar the people in his life. Koichi's breath stuttered, tear-soaked words falling into the space between them. "You almost died, Aizu. I ran to find you after you called but dash." He was cut off by a sob, tears rolling down his cheeks and falling onto the backs of his hands, still folded in his lap. "You weren't dash." He tried again but his voice fell silent and choked. He shook his head and leaned forward to hide his face. Izuku shuffled over and pulled his friend into a hug, hand rubbing between his shoulders in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. His tears began to fall too. He wanted to help people more than anything else. "I'm not gonna die," he said through watery eyes. Koichi looked up to meet his eyes. "Aizu, will this happen again?" He swallowed thickly. "I don't know, it's never been that bad before." He answered honestly, "I'm quirkless, there's a lot of stuff that. I'm glad it was just middle schoolers this time but I can't promise I won't get hurt again." Izuku didn't know that he was doing the right thing, but hopefully knowing what to expect would give Koichi a chance to know what he was signing up for. Hopefully, he wouldn't be as worried about Izuku the next time someone stated anti-quirk laws to make him leave a store, or hopefully, he could be ready and know that although Izuku couldn't go to hospitals he still had somewhere. Koichi still looked afraid. "I know I said you being quirkless is fine, and it is, but I think I just assumed it didn't mean anything for you. So what do you have to think about, I guess? Am I asking the right questions?" he asked. Izuku let a teary smile break through. No one had ever been so open to understanding before. Hell, Koichi was the first to accept as easily as he did. Izuku didn't know that he'd ever be able to explain how grateful he was for the other boy. "Some things aren't as present for me personally, or if they are it's just something I'm used to?" It sounded like a question. He shouldn't have been used to it. He shouldn't have to balance his humanity with other people's comfort. "I won't be able to adopt kids when I'm older. I can be turned away from jobs that need a quirk safety certification. A business can refuse me service. I actually can't be a vigilante surprisingly enough." Izuku added the last words to try and lighten the mood. Koichi's eyebrows shot up. "How do you mean?" "Vigilantism is defined as using a quirk to detain those seen as deviant or criminal on behalf of the law without a heroic's license. I don't have a quirk, so as long as I only used reasonable force and never attacked first, I'd be fine." "Didn't," Koichi frowned, "and what about the things that do affect you?" Izuku slumped down, feeling the weight of all he'd been carrying his whole life as long as he could remember, and suddenly it felt a lot heavier than it had for a long time. Inko returned from the kitchen holding a tray of tea and plates for dinner, but she stopped in the doorway to give her son space to have the conversations he'd need to have with the people he wanted to keep in his life. "There aren't any laws protecting me against teachers in school or future employers taking advantage, detentions, work that's 10 times harder than classmates. I'm barely passing most of my classes because they don't mark fairly. And I can't go to hospitals," he said. They either refuse to treat me or I'm not prioritized. There's a lot of cases where quirkless people have died from medical neglect. There's more but, he shrugged then looked up. He couldn't read the expression on Koichi's face. It wasn't the pity he was used to or the shame that he was made of glass. He took a shuddering breath. Okay. Izuku felt his face contorted worriedly at how vague a response it was. Okay. Okay, we can figure out how I can help, if I can help, and if I can't then I can be here for you if you need anything. Good friends aren't just around for the good times, so as much as I'd rather you didn't need to think about hate crimes and all of it, until there's a better time when you don't have to think about all that, okay? Koichi says, his hands landing off Izuku's shoulders and then pulling him into a hug. Just please promise me you'll be okay, that you're not going to be hurt, that you'll always come out the other side. Izuku felt his chest ache at how much fear there was in Koichi's voice while he begged Izuku not to die. The contrast from the certainty of telling him that all the trouble he dealt with was worth it to be his friend. Izuku swallowed and returned the hug, grabbing a handful of Koichi's shirt so the other boy knew he wanted to hold on just as tightly to him, both literally and figuratively, even with a broken arm. I promise I'll stay alive. He swore, tears stinging his eyes. He didn't cry. Inko stood in the doorway, watching as her son had someone else there this time. She smiled to herself, feeling her chest warm and ache, heart stuttering. She silently prayed that Izuku would always have Koichi there, that he wouldn't be alone, and that he'd always have a friend with him. She stepped out of the room when the tears silently began falling down her cheeks so the two young boys wouldn't need to hear her crying. Thank goodness for Koichi, she thought to herself as she prayed to the skies to keep her son safe and keep his friend with him too.